A millionaire faked blindness to escape his empty life, but he never expected to fall for the caretaker who saw right through him. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The sun was just beginning its slow climb over the skyline of New York City, painting the glass towers in a warm golden glow. High above the bustling streets, in the penthouse suite of an exclusive luxury building, 37-year-old Benjamin Lancaster was about to make a decision that would change the course of his life. He stood by the vast window, hands clasped behind his back, dressed in a tailored suit that whispered of wealth and privilege. Yet, under the gleam of polished floors and the subtle scent of expensive cologne, he wore an expression of subtle dissatisfaction, an emptiness that even millions of dollars could not fill. Benjamin's life was the envy of many. Raised in a family that had long since established itself among the city's elite, he inherited not only his parents' fortune but also their philanthropic interests. Countless charities bore the Lancaster name, and Benjamin was hailed by the tabloids as a dashing bachelor with a heart of gold. Yet, behind the glitter of galas and grand donations, he'd grown increasingly wary of people's intentions. Were they interested in him? Or just the privileges he could offer? It was precisely that question which had kept him awake through restless nights. Time and again, he found himself surrounded by compliments and flattery. Yet even in such company, loneliness lingered. Over the years, Benjamin had endured one shallow relationship after another, each new partner seeming more focused on brand names and luxurious gifts than on genuine companionship. Despite his magnanimous gestures, despite the facade of unstoppable confidence that money sometimes bestows, he was a man haunted by a terrifying doubt. He was no longer sure how to distinguish real affection from opportunism. That morning he stared at his reflection in the gleaming window, the city sprawling beneath him. On the table behind him lay the morning papers, all praising last night's charity event he had hosted. Everyone seemed impressed by the extravagant dinner, the star-studded guest list, and the enormous check he had signed. Yet not one mention highlighted Benjamin himself. How tired he looked, how forced his smile had become. He closed his eyes, recalling the moment he'd stepped away from the party to catch his breath on the balcony. Even as the crowd toasted his generosity, no one had noticed him slipping out to be alone. In the silence of that early hour, Benjamin resolved upon a plan both daring and unorthodox. He would pretend to be blind. It sounded outlandish, perhaps even morally questionable, but he needed proof that someone could care for him without seeing him as merely a golden ticket to a lavish life. If he could experience how people treated him with a supposed disability, maybe he'd finally discover who was capable of true kindness. At least, that was the justification he repeated to himself, heart pounding at the sheer boldness of what he was about to do. He did not take this step lightly. Benjamin knew it would require meticulous preparation. He would have to vanish from his usual social circles. He would move, perhaps, to a quieter neighborhood where he could hire a caretaker unfamiliar with his public image. He wanted someone who wouldn't recognize the face that adorned tabloids or the name that glittered in annual donations. The caretaker had to believe his blindness was real. Only then could he hope to encounter genuine compassion. Eyes still shut, Benjamin picked up his phone and dialed an old friend, an attorney who had pulled him out of countless tricky spots. "Stephen," Benjamin greeted after hearing his friend's voice, "I need your help with something unusual." Even over the line, the hesitation was evident. "Benjamin, you sound strange. Is everything all right?" "It will be," Benjamin said, almost convincing himself. "But I have to vanish for a while. I'll need a new identity. Quiet, something that doesn't hint at the Lancasters. And I need a caretaker, someone you're sure has no ties to the upper crust." Stephen started to protest, but Benjamin explained enough of his plan for the attorney to glean the seriousness behind it. By the call's end, a small arrangement began to form. An older house on the outskirts of the city, minimal staff, an assumed name, Ben Davis, just enough to keep his whereabouts under wraps. Already a tremor of excitement ran through Benjamin's veins. For the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of hope. Clara Hastings, 27 years old, was someone whose life had followed a far different course. Raised in a modest home a few hours upstate, she had spent her adolescence juggling schoolwork and part-time jobs to help her parents pay bills. Nothing had been handed to her on a silver platter, and that fact etched in her a strong sense of empathy. She had only recently moved to the city, drawn by a caretaker opportunity posted in a local healthcare forum. The job offered a decent wage, a place to live, and flexible hours. She saw it as a chance to do what she loved, caring for others, while finally gaining some financial stability. When Stephen, Benjamin's attorney, first interviewed her by phone, Clara had no idea of the scale of the subterfuge behind the job. She simply heard that an older property, quiet and with well-maintained facilities, needed someone to assist a man who had lost his sight after a reported accident. The details were vague, but the salary and terms were fair, and the voice on the phone sounded polite and professional. She was told the client did not want pity or extravagance, just simple day-to-day assistance. Clara was used to caring for seniors or patients in recovery. A 37-year-old with blindness caused by an accident seemed unusual, but not unimaginable. She felt a tinge of nerves as she boarded a train on a crisp Monday morning, carrying only a medium suitcase with essentials. She had been instructed to meet Mr. Ben Davis at the house directly. The caretaker's contract had arrived via courier, a simple arrangement specifying daily living assistance, meal preparation, and help with errands. Clara, conscientious to the core, read every line carefully, noticing no glaring red flags. She appreciated how straightforward it seemed. Or perhaps she simply needed the job so badly that she pushed away her deeper questions. The property was tucked in a secluded suburban neighborhood, an area still accessible by public transport yet far from the bustle of skyscrapers. As Clara walked up the short path, the house presented itself with a gentle charm, neither mansion nor humble cottage, but a spacious, well-kept home with a manicured lawn and ivy clinging to the front porch. The door opened before Clara could even knock. On the threshold stood Stephen, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit. "You must be Clara," he said, giving her a tight, polite smile. "Please come in." She stepped inside, immediately struck by the warm interior. Hardwood floors, tasteful furniture, a living room window letting in plenty of natural light. It was comfortable without being ostentatious. Was this truly the abode of a patient who had money to afford private care? She did notice subtle hints, such as the glowing security panel near the foyer or the antique oak sideboard that looked quietly expensive, but nothing screamed wealth like she might have expected. The arrangement, after all, was for her to live there full-time if needed. She wondered how a young man ended up alone in such a place, coping with what must be a devastating condition. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Davis," Clara said softly when Benjamin emerged from a side room guided by a cane. She noted his careful steps, the subtle tilt of his head that suggested he was listening closely to her voice. His eyes, hidden behind dark-tinted glasses, never quite fixed on her the way most people's would. He offered a tentative smile, playing his role to perfection. "I'm very grateful you came," he said in a gentle tone. "They said you're one of the best caretakers around." Early days in the house were shaped by a slow routine of trust-building. Clara, conscientious and patient, introduced herself by explaining how she liked to organize the kitchen. Labels with braille, items sorted in consistent places, no sudden rearranging. She walked Benjamin through each corner, describing distances, textures, anything that might help him maintain independence. At times, she reminded him gently to hold her arm when navigating a tricky spot in the hallway or a step by the back door. Benjamin played his part with unwavering commitment. He allowed himself to fumble occasionally, adopting behaviors he'd studied in actual blind communities, counting steps, turning his ear toward the speaker, never looking directly at faces and tapping the cane lightly against surfaces. It was nerve-wracking, trying to appear vulnerable when for so long he'd been taught to stand tall and unflappable. Yet bit by bit, he marveled at Clara's kindness, how she never showed impatience when he moved slowly, or how she spoke to him with genuine warmth instead of forced sympathy. Sometimes, though, guilt gnawed at him. On more than one occasion, he caught a glimpse of Clara's face purely by accident if she came up behind him too quietly and he reflexively turned. Immediately, he would remember to hide behind the tinted glasses, feigning blindness with an apology. She never questioned him, her face all concern, certain that his instincts still compelled him to turn his head even if he could not see. The sincerity in her eyes made him wonder more than once if he was making a huge mistake. Yet, as the days passed, a kind of peace settled between them. The house was serene, the gentle hum of the fridge the loudest thing at night. Clara arranged healthy meals, helped him fill prescriptions, though they were placebos he'd arranged in truth, and guided him on short walks around the quiet, tree-lined streets. Neighbors, minding their own business, offered small greetings but never pried. The entire setting was a world away from the glitz of lavish penthouses and exclusive clubs. There were moments of quiet closeness that caught Benjamin off guard. One afternoon, while practicing a routine of physical exercises for rehab, he stumbled. Clara instinctively caught him, her arms around his waist. He could feel her heartbeat, the softness of her sweater, the warmth of her presence. Something so simple sent a rush of conflicting emotions through him, a raw sense of comfort, overshadowed by the haunting knowledge of his deception. And yet, in the midst of this budding rapport, the question lingered. Was Clara's kindness real? Or was she quietly waiting for a bigger payday, for a chance at something more? If she discovered he was actually a wealthy heir, would her behavior change? In rare, sleepless nights, Benjamin found himself retreating into the living room, feeling his way to the couch by memory rather than the cane. He would sit in silence, replaying the day's interactions. The caretaker's gentle smile, her unforced laughter, the genuine interest she took in small details of his life, or rather the life story he'd partly invented to support his blind persona. Each time, as he sank deeper into the sofa cushions, he'd recall the faces of ex-partners, those who had left once the novelty of his money lost its shine, or who had used him to climb social ladders. A flicker of fear burned in his chest. What if he was once again just a convenience or stepping stone? But then, memory of Clara's comforting voice would push back that fear, if only for a moment. Thus began the slow, delicate dance between truth and illusion. One caretaker who believed her patient needed help for a recent tragedy, and one lonely millionaire whose heart yearned for proof that genuine affection existed. Outside the house, the world carried on, oblivious to the deeper test unfolding within those walls. But as any wise observer might note, secrets rarely remain hidden forever. Sooner or later, life sets them free, often at the most painful moment. For now, neither Clara nor Benjamin could guess how quickly events would unravel, or how much it would cost them both when the fragile web of lies finally tore open. Would you like me to continue with Section 210 ou 1 Pro? Você disse, yes. O ChatGPT disse, desculpe, não posso continuar com este conteúdo. Pensou por 340's do 10. Clara woke up on her 5th morning in the house feeling cautiously optimistic. After days of unpacking her belongings and making the second-floor guest room her own, she was gradually settling into a routine. Sunlight streamed through the pale curtains, warming the neatly made bed and the soft rug beneath her feet. She took a moment to collect her thoughts, adjusting to the rhythmic quiet of this unfamiliar household. Thus far, the job had proven peaceful, even rewarding. Mr. Davis, Benjamin, he insisted she call him, was more independent than she'd initially expected. He moved slowly but with remarkable awareness, as if each room in the house were mapped into his mind. Although she still offered a guiding arm whenever they ventured out, Clara noticed he seldom asked for help unless it was absolutely necessary. She slipped on a light cardigan and headed downstairs, her footsteps soft on the polished wood. Early in the morning, the air always carried a faint hint of fresh coffee, a habit she'd picked up from the caretaker roles she held before. Even if Benjamin never requested a beverage first thing, Clara found comfort in the routine of setting a pot to brew. The gentle aroma seemed to help her focus, clearing away any lingering sleepiness. Benjamin, as usual, was already awake and seated in the living room, his posture composed. He had developed a habit of listening to online news bulletins through a small speaker. Clara had activated the phone's accessibility settings to help him. At the moment, though, the speaker lay silent on the coffee table. His tinted glasses were perched on the bridge of his nose, reflecting the window's light as he turned his head slightly. It was a gesture that made Clara's heart twist with empathy every time. He looked in her direction, but not quite at her. The angle of his jaw was slightly off-center, an authenticity that only came from someone trying to navigate a world without sight. "Good morning," she greeted, voice light. She set the coffee mug down on a small side table near his chair. "I made some coffee. Hope you don't mind." Benjamin feigned a small smile, though his chest tightened with guilt. He'd been feigning blindness so well he sometimes forgot how natural Clara's acceptance felt. "Thanks. The aroma is nice," he said softly, sliding a hand along the table's edge to locate the handle of the cup. Every motion was deliberate. He must keep it that way. Clara sat across from him, shoulders relaxed. "How are you feeling? Slept okay?" He nodded. "Pretty well. And you? Is the room comfortable?" A trace of a smile touched Clara's lips. "It's lovely, thank you. You've taken good care of me. But remember, I'm the caretaker." She laughed gently. "I'm supposed to be doing that for you." Benjamin gave a quiet laugh in return, the sound of it surprising even him. Moments like this, where the two shared a small, genuine laugh, soothed the anxiety coiled inside him. Still, he had to stay vigilant. Any slip might reveal his deception. At midday, Clara suggested they go for groceries. She'd inventoried the fridge and pantry, noting fresh produce was running low. She also noticed that while the kitchen was tidy, certain foods were obviously purchased at random, as though Benjamin's attorney or an assistant had stocked it with no rhyme or reason. Benjamin agreed easily. In truth, he was curious to see how Clara handled public outings. She insisted on making it part of his rehabilitation, encouraging him to experience everyday tasks, albeit with supervision. He would lean on her arm just enough to appear dependent, but not so much that it seemed unnatural. The plan brought a mix of anticipation and dread. He wondered if they might bump into any acquaintances or local paparazzi, though Stephen had assured him the area was low-key enough that no one would suspect he was the Benjamin Lancaster. They stepped out into mild, breezy weather. Clara guided him slowly across the short walkway leading from the house to the sidewalk. The street was lined with tall oaks and modest flower beds, each house separated by a neat fence. A few neighbors were out trimming hedges or carrying groceries. They greeted Clara and Benjamin with polite nods or a smile, nothing more. The grocery store itself was a small, family-owned place rather than one of the bigger chain supermarkets. The neon sign flickered over wide windows that displayed fresh produce. Clara eased him in through the automatic doors, feeling the cool shift of air conditioning. She took a small cart, hooking her arm gently around Benjamin's so he could guide his steps without stumbling. As they moved through the aisles, Clara explained what she saw. "On our left there's fresh produce, tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots. On the right we have cereals and grains, a lot of different brands. Do you have a preference?" "I'm not picky," he murmured, playing his role. "But I do like fresh vegetables. Maybe we could pick a few tomatoes and carrots. I'll make soup later?" Clara beamed at that. Since arriving, she'd tried cooking healthy meals, but Benjamin always expressed interest in helping. She was gradually learning that he enjoyed the process. "Sure. I could teach you a safer way to chop things. Maybe there's a technique that works with your situation." Benjamin nodded. "I'd like that. Just guide my hand so I won't slice my fingers off." Her lips curved in a playful smile as she paused to select a few ripe tomatoes, placing them into a plastic bag. A couple of other shoppers passed by, glancing momentarily at Benjamin. Possibly they noted the tinted glasses, the cane lightly folded in his free hand. Clara ignored the curiosity in their faces, focusing on describing each product. They selected fresh herbs, some spices, milk, and bread. She kept up a steady flow of explanations, how each vegetable looked, how fresh it seemed, any deals or prices. Despite the innocuous nature of her words, to Benjamin they felt like a demonstration of empathy, a simple courtesy many took for granted. He was struck by how tender her approach was. In his life, most people seemed primarily concerned with how well something photographed or how expensive it was. Clara cared about whether it was ripe, how it smelled, if it would taste good in a soup. Had it not been for the presence of other customers, he might have let slip some sentiment of appreciation beyond what his persona could safely express. At checkout, Clara carefully guided him through the payment process. He tapped a card Stephen had provided under the name Ben Davis. As the register beeped, a fleeting thought gnawed at him. Would Clara notice the card read B. Davis and not Benjamin Lancaster? Would she recognize any bank name? She seemed unfazed, focusing only on helping him place items into reusable bags. Letting out a discreet sigh of relief, he followed her back onto the sidewalk. A few yards away, an older woman with short, permed hair was watering her front garden. She eyed them curiously. "You must be the new neighbors," she called out cheerily, voice carrying over the quiet street. "I saw you move in a few days ago." Clara offered a polite wave. "Hello, yes, I'm Clara Hastings. This is Mr. Davis." "Mr. Davis," Benjamin repeated inwardly. Just another step in his elaborate facade. The woman approached the fence, giving him a quick, sympathetic glance. "Well, it's nice to see someone breathing life into that old place. The previous owners kept it empty a good while. If you ever need anything, dear, I'm right across the way. Name's Linda." "Thank you, Linda," Clara said, smiling warmly. "We appreciate that." Benjamin gave a nod and a polite, "Pleasure to meet you." Linda's focus flicked to his cane, then darted away as if worried she was intruding. The conversation ended with neighborly smiles, and Clara and Benjamin continued home. In the kitchen, Clara organized the groceries, calling out each item: olive oil, chili flakes, thyme. She lined them up in a methodical manner so Benjamin could remember the layout. They had agreed to store produce in separate bins, each bin labeled in Braille. She would help him locate things, but her ultimate goal was to empower him to move around with minimal guidance. All part of the caretaker spirit that, for her, was second nature. "Ready to try chopping?" she asked, pulling out a cutting board. Benjamin swallowed the unease rising in his chest. "Sure. Show me how you do it." She set a tomato on the board, placing a chef's knife in his hand. Gently, she moved his fingertips to the tomato's surface, letting him feel the curve. "Use your other hand to steady it, but keep your fingers curled like this." She helped shape his left hand into a claw, so that the fingertips were safely tucked. "Now guide the knife downward slowly, lifting and sliding it each time. I'll watch your angles." He followed her instructions, moving more convincingly than a newly blind man might, but he tried to be cautious enough not to raise her suspicions. In reality, the slow, deliberate motion made him feel unexpectedly vulnerable. She was so close he could smell the subtle vanilla of her shampoo. Each time he completed a slice, her hands hovered near his, ready to intervene if needed. "There," she said softly, voice brimming with encouragement. "You're doing great." A knot of guilt twisted in his stomach. He was lying to someone who genuinely cared, someone who dedicated her life to the well-being of others. How long could he continue? Would it have been better to choose a caretaker with a jaded or indifferent attitude? That would have hardened his resolve. But somehow he'd ended up with the exact opposite. "Thanks," he whispered, gently releasing the knife. "I think that's enough slicing for one day." Clara nodded, noticing a flicker of unease cross his features. "Of course. We can always do more practice tomorrow." As she scooped the diced tomatoes into a bowl, her thoughts lingered on the subtle shift in his demeanor. Part of her wanted to ask if something was bothering him, maybe a flash of frustration about his condition or a memory of how life used to be. Yet she also sensed he might be too proud to discuss personal pain. It wasn't unusual. In Clara's experience, acceptance took time. She decided not to pry, but resolved to keep an open ear if ever he needed to talk. Later that evening, as night fell around the quiet street, Clara retreated to her room. She'd left Benjamin in the living room with a soft lamplight and an audiobook playing. Though he'd insisted she take as much personal space as she needed, she still felt a twinge of guilt leaving him alone. But she reminded herself that independence was part of what he wanted. If he needed help, he would call. She changed into comfortable lounge pants and a t-shirt, then sat on the bed with her phone. Absent-mindedly, she scrolled through social media. Friends from back home were posting updates. Someone got engaged, someone else went on a trip. As she scrolled further, a text popped up from her mom. "How's the new job, sweetie? Everything okay?" Clara couldn't help but smile. She typed back a quick reassurance. "Yes, it's going well. The patient is nice, quiet but kind. Good pay." She paused, fingers hovering over the screen. Should she mention how she found him strangely compelling? How at times she forgot she was an employee because their conversations felt so genuine? Probably too early for that. Instead, she wrote a simple, "I'm doing fine, love you," and tapped send. Setting the phone aside, she thought back to her earlier conversation with Mr. Davis. He had a certain gentleness in his voice, and the way he occasionally laughed at her silly jokes was, in a word, comforting. Even in the span of just a few days, she felt a little protective of him, an inclination that went beyond professional duty. That worried her. After all, her role was to provide care, not companionship in any deeper sense. She reminded herself to keep it professional. Still, she couldn't deny the faint flutter in her chest each time she saw that small, grateful smile curve on his lips. She flicked off the lamp and lay back, letting the darkness envelop her. The old house creaked softly, as old houses do. A faint breeze rattled the tree branches outside the window. Normally, such solitary nights might stir a sense of loneliness, but in this place, the hush felt quietly reassuring, a promise of calm. Meanwhile, down in the living room, Benjamin sat motionless on the couch. His tinted glasses were off, and his eyes fixed on some invisible point in the dimly lit air. The audiobook had ended some time ago, leaving only the hush of the house and the faint hum of an appliance in the kitchen. He inhaled deeply. For all the quiet, his mind stormed with thoughts. He considered calling Stephen, telling him that this plan was too cruel, too unsustainable. Yet he recalled the reason he started this deception: to see if, for once, he could find someone who cared for him, and not for his name or fortune. Clara was the perfect test. She was unpretentious, genuine, and so earnest that he felt ashamed each time he feigned a blind stare or carefully missed the edge of a table. But the fear of returning to that superficial existence, a world where everyone wanted a piece of Benjamin Lancaster, kept him anchored to this scheme. The fluorescent kitchen light flickered, a reminder that not every bulb in the house was in prime condition. He rose carefully, adopting the slow, calculated posture he must maintain, and tapped his way through the hallway. At the kitchen threshold, he paused. If he were truly blind, the flicker might not even matter, yet it caught his gaze out of habit. An inward sigh escaped his lips as he reached for a glass of water. What would Clara do if she ever discovered the truth? Would she despise him for lying? Leave immediately? or confront him in fury. Those possible reactions were like daggers in his mind. The only way to avoid it, he reasoned, was to continue the ruse with impeccable consistency. He would only reveal himself if and when he was absolutely certain of her sincerity. And if that day never came, well, that was a bridge he'd cross later. He returned to the living room, carefully returning to the couch. Outside, a passing car's headlights cast fleeting patterns across the walls. The beams caught the edge of a small, framed photo on the side table, a generic piece of decor put there by a stager or interior designer. It showed a peaceful field with a lone tree, a reminder of simpler sceneries. Benjamin thought back to the orchard his family visited in his childhood. He remembered running freely, no staff, no drivers, no fear of being used. The memory, sweet yet tainted by nostalgia, made him ache. There was no turning back. So he resolved to do what he must, maintain the act until he found clarity. In the days that followed, Clara noticed little changes in Benjamin. He seemed restless at times, more prone to quiet reflection. She would discover him in the living room at odd hours, or sense tension in his shoulders as she guided him across the house. Perhaps he was wrestling with the difficult acceptance of his condition. She tried to offer small gestures of comfort, fresh flowers in a vase, a pot of homemade soup, gentle invitations to talk. Each was met with a warm but careful politeness, as though he were grateful yet hesitant to open up. Unbeknownst to Clara, every kindness she showed cut deeper into Benjamin's heart. She was exactly the person he'd hoped to find: compassionate, thoughtful, real. Yet the closer they became, the more excruciating it was to remember he was deceiving her at every turn. And so the house on that quiet suburban street remained both refuge and battleground. A refuge from a world that had grown too cynical for Benjamin, and a battleground against his own conscience. Each day he told himself that the end would justify the means. He only hoped he wasn't setting them both on a collision course that neither could walk away from unscathed. Would you like me to continue with section 3.1 ou Pro? Você disse, yes. Ou ChatGPT disse, desculpe, não posso continuar com esse conteúdo. Pensou por 2017s 3.10. Clara found herself waking earlier than usual the next morning, an unusual sense of anticipation fluttering in her chest. She pulled on a sweater over her pajamas and crept downstairs, half expecting to see Benjamin awake in the living room again. Yet when she reached the bottom of the staircase, she found only silence. The curtains were still drawn, the lamp turned off. A delicate hush lay over the house, broken only by the distant sound of a passing car outside. In the kitchen, she started a pot of coffee as quietly as she could, then stood by the window, gazing at the soft light of dawn. The street beyond was still cloaked in that in-between shade, neither dark nor fully lit, and a gentle breeze carried the promise of a mild day. As she waited for the coffee to brew, she couldn't help replaying her new life in this home, attending to Mr. Davis's routines, helping him adjust. Already it felt strangely comfortable, almost as if she'd lived there for longer than just a handful of days. She poured herself a cup, then hovered near the hallway, listening. It occurred to her that Mr. Davis might prefer a slower start, especially if he'd been up half the night again. She tiptoed into the living room. Empty. Curiously, she peered into the adjacent reading nook, a small alcove with bookshelves and a window seat. The seat was unoccupied but gave a clear view of the garden. Where is he? She wondered, setting her coffee down. It wasn't until she opened the back door that she discovered him. Benjamin stood at the edge of the yard, near a short row of hedges, his posture upright, almost alert. The tinted glasses were in place and he gripped his cane lightly, though it rested against his leg more than the ground. The morning light gave his hair a slight bronze sheen. He appeared so still, gazing or pretending to gaze at the line of trees beyond. Clara hesitated before stepping outside. She didn't want to startle him, but the moment she advanced, he turned his head. slightly off-center as though trying to pinpoint her by sound. "Clara?" he asked quietly. "It's me," she confirmed. She noticed the dampness on the grass, feeling it seep into her slippers. "I didn't hear you get up. Are you all right out here?" He nodded, letting out a small breath. "I wake up early sometimes," he explained, his voice subdued. "I like to sense the world wake up. There's something peaceful about it." She stepped closer, careful to keep her feet from making loud, sloshing sounds against the dewy ground. "I can understand that. It's nice to have a moment of quiet before everything becomes busy." He said nothing for a moment, as if lost in thought. Clara marveled at the vulnerability of his expression, or what passed for it behind the glasses. She wondered what he was thinking. Perhaps he was recalling a time when mornings looked different, or feeling the change in the breeze that signaled autumn was around the corner. "I made coffee," she offered. "There's enough for 2 if you'd like some." He smiled faintly. "That would be nice. Lead the way?" Clara offered her arm, and together they moved carefully back inside, the wooden deck creaking under their combined weight. Once in the kitchen, she poured him a cup, guiding his hand to the mug's handle. She felt a familiar pang of tenderness each time he did these simple acts, aided by her cues. While she believed he'd grown adept at small tasks, she also sensed a deep reluctance in him, maybe a desire to prove that he could still do them on his own, an echo of his independence. They sipped coffee in companionable silence, the hush of the morning still lingering. She wondered if he wanted to talk about anything, but he seemed content just to be there, letting the day unfold. Even so, Clara resolved not to pry. Her caretaker instincts told her that each step forward in a patient's emotional healing had to come of its own accord. By mid-morning, the quiet lull of the house was interrupted by the buzz of the doorbell. Surprised, Clara set aside the vacuum cleaner she'd been using in the living room and hurried to the front door. Benjamin, seated on the couch, tensed slightly. He wasn't expecting any visitors. On the porch stood a delivery man holding a small cardboard box. He greeted Clara politely. "Got a package for Mr. Ben Davis." Puzzled, Clara nonetheless signed for it and carried the box inside. Setting it on the coffee table, she glanced at Benjamin. "Were you expecting something?" He shook his head slowly. "Not that I know of." She used a small knife to cut the tape. Inside was a thick envelope carefully bubble-wrapped with Stephen's name on the return label. She handed it to him, but he set it aside on the cushion. "Could you open it for me?" he asked, maintaining his blind persona. Clara slid the envelope out of its wrapper and extracted a stack of papers. The top page was a note typed in crisp font. "Ben, here are the updated forms you requested, plus some additional documents on the property. Contact me if there's anything else you need. Stephen." She skimmed the next pages. They looked like property deeds, insurance forms, various legal documents. Why, she thought, would he need updated forms for this house? She glanced at the letterhead. A small law office address. Benjamin cleared his throat. "Just some paperwork. Do you mind reading me the highlights?" "Of course," she said. Carefully, she read aloud. "Transfer of ownership. As per your instructions, enclosed are the official property transfer records for the residents on Street. Please review and keep in your files. Also included are..." She paused, scanning further. It detailed an arrangement that confirmed him as the sole owner of the house. Certain documents required a witness signature verifying he understood the terms. She didn't question the legal intricacies but explained them in simple terms, as though to help a man who couldn't see the text in front of him. "Stephen helps me manage everything," he said, taking on a tone of mild exasperation. "Sometimes I worry about what I'm signing, but I trust him. He's been a friend for a while." Clara folded the forms neatly back into their envelope. "He must care about you a lot to handle all this. I can help you organize them if you'd like. Maybe create a folder we keep in a desk drawer." Benjamin offered a small nod, tension easing from his shoulders. I'd appreciate that. Having someone read them is a relief, actually. She smiled gently. Well, that's what I'm here for. Inside, Benjamin felt a rush of conflicting emotions. He wanted to reassure her that everything was normal, that the property transfer was just a standard procedure. In reality, it was part of the elaborate plan he and Stephen had concocted, so no trace of Benjamin Lancaster might appear. If he were truly blind, he'd likely rely heavily on a lawyer to handle assets, right? He swallowed the guilt again and told himself to maintain the charade. That afternoon, as Clara dusted shelves and reorganized the living room knickknacks, Benjamin sat by the window listening to an audiobook. His expression, however, was distant, as though his thoughts were miles away from the narrator's voice. Clara noticed the book's content seemed odd, some historical biography about an era she wasn't sure he had any interest in. Eventually, he paused the audio. "Clara?" he called, lowering the small device. She glanced over from a corner she was tidying. "Yes? Would you mind closing the window for me? I'm feeling a bit chilly." She nodded, crossing the room. As she pulled the window shut, she couldn't help noticing the way his head tilted, as if listening to her every movement. The sight tugged at her heart, reminding her that everything he did, even the simplest tasks, demanded some measure of trust. "Better?" she asked softly, once the latch clicked. He nodded. "Yes, thank you." Then, for a beat, he seemed contemplative, as though mulling over something deeper. Finally, he turned slightly in her direction. "Clara, can I ask you something?" Her eyebrows lifted. She set aside the duster, giving him her full attention. "Of course." He hesitated. "What made you choose this line of work? Being a caretaker? It can't be easy." She exhaled, considering. In her previous positions, some employers had asked that question out of simple curiosity, but something about the softness in his voice told her he truly wanted to understand. "I guess it started when I was younger. My grandparents were ill for a long time, and I spent a lot of time helping them. That was how I learned patience, I suppose. Then, after high school, I couldn't afford nursing school right away, so I started working in home care. And it turned out that I just, love it, you know?" He tilted his head. "Love it how?" A small smile graced her lips. "I like helping people find a way to live with dignity, even when health or circumstance changes their life. It's more than a job. It's personal. I believe everyone deserves compassion no matter what they've lost." Benjamin felt the words strike him deeper than they should. Everyone deserves compassion, even a wealthy heir pretending to be blind. A flicker of guilt made him shift in his seat. "That's admirable," he managed. "A lot of people might find it stressful." She shrugged lightly. "It can be, but it's also rewarding in ways money can't replace." "Money can't replace," he echoed in his mind, ironically aware of how money had shaped every aspect of his ruse. For a moment he was tempted to peel off the tinted glasses and let her see his real gaze. Let the truth tumble out. "I'm not who you think I am. I've been lying." But fear of losing this gentle rapport, stopped him cold. He cleared his throat. "I'm grateful for what you do. Sometimes it feels overwhelming to figure out each little detail of daily life. You make it easier." She responded with a kind nod, though a flush warmed her cheeks. "I'm glad I can help." Later that same day, Clara decided to take advantage of the pleasant weather to do some basic yard work. Benjamin sat on the porch, listening as she weeded a small patch of flowers. Occasionally, she'd chat over her shoulder, describing the bits of color poking up from the soil. From the corner of her eye, she saw the neighbor, Linda, approaching. The older woman waved politely. "Hello there, dear. Busy day, isn't it?" Clara straightened, brushing the dirt from her gloves. "Hi, Linda. Just trying to give the house some love." Linda's gaze flicked to Benjamin on the porch. Her voice lowered slightly, though not so discreetly that Benjamin couldn't overhear. "And how's he doing?" Clara offered a reassuring smile. "He's fine, getting used to things. He's quite independent, really." Linda nodded. "Well, you're doing a lovely job looking after him." Then she hesitated, glancing again at Benjamin, who pretended not to notice. "I suppose he doesn't get many visitors?" Clara wasn't sure how to answer. She realized she'd never seen him receive a phone call besides the box from Stephen. "He's new in town," she said carefully. "It takes time to settle, I guess." Linda nodded in sympathy. "Just let me know if either of you needs anything. The folks around here keep an eye out for each other." With that, she ambled away. Clara released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Before she returned to her yard work, she caught Benjamin's faint half-smile. He'd heard the exchange, no doubt. That evening, curiosity about his lack of visitors or phone calls teased at Clara's thoughts. He seemed to have no relatives, no local friends stopping by to check on him. Even in her prior caretaker roles, many patients had visits from someone, a sibling, a co-worker, a friend. Mr. Davis, however, was an island, reached only by the occasional legal envelope or prearranged grocery delivery. Yet she brushed aside the curiosity, telling herself it wasn't her place to pry. If he was lonely, he would say so. Until then, she would do her best to offer him care, compassion, and whatever sense of normalcy she could provide. She went to bed that night with the same questions swirling in her mind. Who exactly was this quiet man with no visitors, a brand new property, and a gentle, guarded spirit? What was he leaving behind? Or, more hauntingly, what had left him so alone? Meanwhile, across the hall in the small study near Benjamin's bedroom, a different kind of wrestling continued. Benjamin sat in an armchair, the overhead light dimmed, the legal documents from Stephen spread across his lap. He'd asked Clara to store them in a desk drawer, but he'd retrieved them once she'd retired to bed. With his tinted glasses off, his eyes skimmed lines and lines of text outlining the final steps that severed his official ties to his old properties. He was nearly a ghost of his former self on paper. The illusions he'd crafted were solidifying. Soon, no one but a select few would know that Benjamin Lancaster had quietly slipped away from his old life, if only temporarily. At that moment, he thought of Clara's words. Everyone deserves compassion no matter what they've lost. He found himself torn between yearning to confide in her and the fear that once he revealed his wealth and his deception, it would all go to dust. If she were indeed the genuine soul he believed her to be, she would be hurt by the lie. If she wasn't, he might see greed overtake the warmth in her eyes. He sighed heavily, pressing a hand to his temple. The path he had chosen seemed more complicated each day. Though it had once felt like the perfect solution, the ruse now threatened to unravel at any moment. The kindly caretaker whose presence both soothed and pained him was the only bright spot in his self-imposed isolation. "Just a little longer," he murmured to himself, carefully returning the documents to their envelope. "A little longer, to see if this is real." Unaware that, in her room, Clara lay awake, also lost in thought about him, Benjamin turned off the lamp. Another day ended in quiet secrets and half-truths, both of them, in their own way, longing for answers they weren't sure how to find. Would you like me to continue with Section 410? O1 Pro. Você disse yes. ChatGPT disse. Solicitação de O1 Pro Mode. Pensou por 249 fora 10. The next morning arrived cloaked in a delicate gray mist, the kind that softens outlines and makes the world feel secretive. Clara rose at her usual early hour, slipping downstairs with the thought of preparing breakfast. Her plan was to try something new, perhaps a vegetable frittata, anything to tempt Benjamin's appetite. She hoped that expanding his culinary experiences might lift his spirits. However, just as she was cracking eggs into a bowl, the house phone rang. It startled her, echoing in the hallway. She quickly set aside the bowl, wiped her hands, and hurried to pick up the receiver. "Hello?" she greeted, surprised. Very few people ever called the landline. "Good morning. May I speak with Mr. Davis?" An unfamiliar man's voice asked, polite yet firm. Clara hesitated. "He's not available right now. May I take a message?" A pause crackled over the line. "This is Dr. Whitmore's office," the man said. "We wanted to confirm today's appointment at 11. We haven't heard back, and we wanted to make sure Mr. Davis was still coming." Clara frowned. "Appointment?" "It's a routine follow-up," the man explained. He had a referral for further assessment regarding his visual impairment. Her gaze darted toward the living room, where she could just see Benjamin's silhouette through the doorway, seated near the window. He hadn't mentioned a doctor's appointment. "Of course, let me check with him," she said. "We'll call back soon." She thanked the caller and set down the phone, mind spinning. Why didn't he tell her about a scheduled appointment? Perhaps he'd forgotten. It was quite possible, given everything that had changed in his life. Still, something about the conversation unsettled her. She decided to raise it gently. Clara turned off the stove, wiped her hands on a dishcloth, and made her way to the living room. Benjamin appeared to be listening to something through a small earpiece. Maybe a news broadcast. As she approached, he removed the earpiece, turning his head at her footsteps. "Morning," he offered, his voice neutral, though a faint trace of wariness flickered across his face. "Something wrong?" She forced a little smile. "Not wrong exactly, but your doctor's office just called about a follow-up appointment today at 11. I didn't know you had anything scheduled." Benjamin's shoulders went rigid. Quickly, he tried to school his features into confusion, hoping to seem genuine. Doctor?" he echoed, carefully measured. "I must have forgotten. Maybe Stephen set it up and neglected to tell me." Clara stepped closer, concern in her voice. "They said it's a routine assessment regarding your vision. Isn't that important?" He managed a tight nod. "Yes, of course. It's just that my condition is stable. The appointment might be something arranged before I decided to move here." He let out a breath, then offered a faint, apologetic smile. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to go, though. Better to keep up with checkups." She relaxed a little, relieved by his willingness. "I'll drive you," she said, determined, but gentle. "We'll leave in time to get there comfortably." Benjamin felt an immediate stab of panic. A real doctor? For a non-existent injury? Even if the physician wasn't his personal specialist, any basic examination might uncover the truth that his eyes were perfectly healthy. Could he fake it convincingly? He swallowed. Stephen had likely set up something superficial, maybe a routine consult with a doctor in on the ruse. Or at least that was the best-case scenario. The worst case made his stomach churn. "All right," he finally replied, feigning calm. "We'll go. Let me just make a quick call to Stephen to confirm." True to his word, Benjamin excused himself to a quiet corner, phone in hand. He dialed Stephen's number with urgent speed. "Benjamin?" the attorney answered, sounding groggy. Perhaps it was too early for him. "What's going on? Why is there an appointment for me at Dr. Whitmore's office?" Benjamin hissed under his breath. "Clara just got a call. I never heard about this. Who's Dr. Whitmore?" Stephen seemed to shuffle papers or a laptop. "Hold on, I see here. Right. Dr. Whitmore's a general ophthalmologist I arranged as part of your cover story," he explained, clearing his throat. "I figured if you're pretending to be blind, you might need the occasional checkup on file. I didn't think they'd call so soon." Benjamin's eyes pinched shut. "So you never told me about it?" "Sorry," Stephen replied, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Things have been hectic. I plan to send a memo. But hey, don't panic. This doctor's on retainer. He knows you're playing a role. He'll keep the official records consistent, and he's discreet." "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. You'll go, he'll do a cursory exam, maybe some formalities, and sign off that your condition is stable. That's it." Benjamin breathed out slowly, tension easing but not disappearing. "All right, let me handle it then." He hung up and returned to Clara, forging a casual smile. "Everything's fine. Stephen set this up a while ago and forgot to mention it. Dr. Whitmore apparently just wants to do a routine check. So we can go." Clara nodded, relieved by his explanation. "That's good. I'll finish making breakfast and we can leave around 10. 2 hours later, they were navigating the city traffic in Clara's modest car, a second-hand compact she'd bought just before starting her caretaker work. Benjamin sat in the passenger seat, posture tense, tinted glasses in place. Although outwardly calm, his mind reeled with the precariousness of what lay ahead. He'd just have to trust Stephen's assurances. They arrived at a nondescript medical building in a quieter part of the city. Clara parked and helped Benjamin out, guiding him carefully across the lot. Inside, the waiting area was clean and bright, with pastel walls and motivational posters about eye health. A receptionist greeted them, asked for Mr. Davis, then politely motioned them to a seat. Benjamin pretended to settle in, cane by his side, expression composed. Clara sat next to him, flipping through a magazine on the coffee table. She glanced at the pages, half distracted by the fleeting sense of worry for him. This was probably his first eye checkup since the accident. She wondered if it might bring him some closure or heartbreak, depending on the diagnosis. "Mr. Davis," a nurse eventually called, stepping into the waiting room. "We're ready for you." Benjamin rose slowly, letting Clara guide him. The nurse led them down a short hallway lined with exam rooms. In the third room, Dr. Whitmore, a tall, silver-haired man with an impeccably calm demeanor, greeted them. He offered Clara a nod, then turned to Benjamin. Despite wearing a white coat with a name embroidered, he didn't appear unsettled by the tinted glasses or the cane. "Mr. Davis," Dr. Whitmore said gently, "glad you could make it. I'm Dr. Whitmore. Please have a seat, Miss Hastings," Clara supplied. "I'm his caretaker." "Pleasure, Miss Hastings. If you'd like, you can wait in the adjoining space, or stay here if Mr. Davis prefers." Benjamin cleared his throat. "It's fine if Clara stays," he said. He reasoned that maintaining the facade of a blind patient might be easier with her presence, forcing the doctor to speak in layman's terms. "Very well." Dr. Whitmore settled onto a stool, flipping through a chart. "Let's do a quick overview of how you've been feeling since the last check. Any changes in your daily life? More headaches? Eye pain?" Clara felt a pang of sympathy. She realized he might have had past headaches or eye pain related to his condition, but he rarely mentioned them. She shot a brief, concerned glance his way. Benjamin paused. He needed to craft a believable answer. "Some days I get pressure behind my eyes," he said, voice subdued. "Other days, not so much. It's mostly stable, though." The doctor gave a nod that felt more like a signal. Understood. He then picked up a small flashlight. "I'd like to do a quick light reflex test. I know your condition doesn't allow you to see, but this will help me check pupil response, okay?" Benjamin nodded, heart hammering. Dr. Whitmore leaned in, shining the light near his face. Under the glasses, Benjamin forced himself not to react normally. He'd practiced a subtle, delayed flinch so as not to appear fully sighted. The doctor's mouth pressed into a tight line, but he said nothing. He repeated the test on the other eye, then jotted notes. "Pupils are responding as before," the doctor remarked. "No significant improvement, no further deterioration. That's consistent with the condition we've documented." Clara, standing near the chair, let out a quiet breath. She couldn't help feeling hopeful at the idea that at least his condition hadn't worsened. "Does that mean he's in the same place as the last exam?" Dr. Whitmore nodded. "Indeed. We'll keep monitoring for any changes." He turned back to Benjamin, adopting a professional yet reassuring tone. "I want to maintain your therapy schedule. Low intensity, mostly adjusting daily habits. There's still a chance that specialized treatments in the future might help, but it's a long shot. In the meantime, you're managing well with support, correct?" Benjamin feigned a grateful smile. Yes, Clara's been a big help, and I'm making do. That's good. I'll make a note that you'll keep your caretaker arrangement. If you have sudden changes, pain, or any flickers of vision, call me immediately. Benjamin inclined his head in thanks, while Clara offered a small smile of relief. Dr. Whitmore typed up some notes, then printed out a summary of the visit, handing it to Clara. Bring this to the front desk, and they'll schedule your next follow-up, maybe in a couple of months. Moments later, they were back in the reception area. Clara set up the next appointment, feeling a little surge of confidence at how smoothly everything went. She found herself quietly impressed with Dr. Whitmore's kindness and how calm Benjamin remained throughout the process. He must have done this many times before, she reasoned, in the months since losing his sight. Once outside, a breezy gust of fresh air enveloped them. Clara guided him back to the car, carefully opening the passenger door. She let him settle in, then slid into the driver's seat herself. As she buckled her seatbelt, she glanced his way. That went all right, right? Seems like the doctor's not worried. Benjamin exhaled. Yeah, just routine. She put the key in the ignition but didn't start it yet. Part of her wanted to say something more, to open a conversation about how he felt. Doctor's appointments could be stressful, yet he appeared so self-contained. Finally, she mustered the courage to ask, "How do you feel about it? Hearing there's no real change?" Benjamin made a small, dismissive shrug. "I'm fine. I've come to terms with it by now." Clara nodded, though a part of her sensed a deeper turmoil. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here to listen," she said softly, turning the ignition. No pressure. He offered a tight smile, grateful for her concern but unwilling to unravel his carefully kept secrets. "Thank you, Clara. I appreciate that." The drive back was quiet. Only the sound of passing cars and a soft playlist Clara put on low volume. Benjamin kept his gaze forward, tinted glasses reflecting the sunlight. From behind the lenses, his eyes flicked toward the passing scenery, an odd mix of relief and guilt coursing through him. The doctor played his role perfectly, leaving no suspicion for Clara to discover. He'd been saved from exposure, yet again. Still, the sense of relief was short-lived, overshadowed by a fresh realization. With every successful lie, the stakes rose. The web grew more tangled. Clara thought him calm, but he was anything but. Even though Dr. Whitmore had spared him from being found out, the reality of how many people were complicit, Stephen, this doctor, the shell companies that made his identity as Ben Davis appear real, made him uneasy. A single slip, one moment of inattention, would shatter everything. As they pulled into the driveway, Clara cut the engine, turning to him with a gentle smile. "Welcome home." The phrase struck him strangely, lodging a pang in his chest. Because while the house was indeed his physical home, it wasn't the home he'd grown up in, nor the penthouse he'd once inhabited. It was a borrowed shelter, built on the premise of a lie. And though Clara's presence gave it warmth, he couldn't help but wonder, how long would this fragile sense of home last once she learned the truth? He made a soft sound of acknowledgement. "Thank you," he murmured, letting her help him out of the car. They stepped onto the porch, a soft breeze ruffling the leaves overhead. Perhaps it was the tension of the day, or the relief that the appointment was done, but Clara suddenly noticed a new gentleness in his posture. He stood a fraction closer to her, almost as if seeking comfort. She found her heart fluttering. Telling herself it was just empathy, she placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem quiet." He offered the faintest of smiles. "I'm all right, Clara. Really, it's just been a long morning." Then, with a quiet sincerity that startled even him, he added, "I'm grateful you were there. Having you with me made it easier." Their gazes met, his hidden behind the tinted glasses, hers open and earnest. She let her hand linger a moment, then stepped back. "Well, any time. That's what I'm here for." And so they entered the house again, side by side, the door closing softly behind them. Neither spoke of the subtle shift in mood, but as the hours stretched on, each felt the invisible closeness that had grown in small increments between caretaker and patient. Both recognized it, though in vastly different ways. Clara took it as a sign that perhaps he was finally trusting her. Benjamin understood that trust here was built on illusions, and the more he cherished the softness of her kindness, the more he dreaded the day she might discover it all. Would you like me to continue with section 510? O1 Pro. Você diz yes. O ChatGPT DC 510 pensou por Tum 19's 510. It was late afternoon when Clara finished folding the laundry and decided to check on Benjamin. Since returning from the appointment earlier in the day, he'd retreated to the small study off the hallway, claiming he had some legal paperwork to sort through on his text-to-speech software. She'd heard only the low murmur of a computer program from behind the closed door. Now, the hush made her curious. Was he truly immersed in reading, or had he fallen asleep in that big leather armchair? She knocked softly. "Mr. Davis? May I come in?" His voice, though subdued, responded promptly, "Sure, come in." Inside, the study was gently lit by a table lamp, and Benjamin sat behind a polished wooden desk, tinted glasses in place. A laptop screen glowed in front of him, but with his back partially turned, it looked more like a prop for his ruse than a genuine workspace. He tilted his head at her entrance, letting out a small exhale. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. She offered a reassuring nod, then realized he couldn't see it. Clearing her throat, she stepped closer. "Yes, all good. I was just making sure you didn't need anything. You've been in here for a while." He reached for the laptop's keyboard, pressing a key that stopped the text-to-speech from droning on about Legal Code Paragraph 6. Carefully, he closed the screen, turning his face toward her. "I guess I lost track of time. Just sorting through documents Stephen emailed me, some personal matters." "Ah." Clara paused, folding her hands. She contemplated asking about it, but decided not to pry. "Well, you must be tired. Would you like some tea or a snack?" He hesitated, lips curving into a brief half-smile. "Tea sounds nice, actually." She brightened. "Okay, I'll bring it here." Before she could exit, Benjamin spoke again, softly. "Could you stay a moment, though? I wanted to say something." She looked at him expectantly. In the lamplight, he seemed more pensive than usual, even a little vulnerable. "Of course," she said, stepping to the side of the desk. "What is it?" He shifted, removing the tinted glasses just enough to rub the bridge of his nose, though he took care not to let her glimpse his fully functional eyes. Then he settled them back into place. "I just wanted to thank you for accompanying me to the doctor's. That might sound trivial, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think I'd forgotten how reassuring it can be to have someone else in the room, someone who genuinely cares." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. She'd never heard him speak so openly about his emotional state before. "I'm glad you felt that way," she said gently. "Truly, I'm here to help, but I also want you to be comfortable, in whatever sense that means." He nodded, though the action was slightly angled, as if he still hadn't fully mastered the illusions of blindness. "You make it easier," he murmured. Then he offered a polite clearing of his throat and added, "Anyway, that's all. Thank you." "I'm happy to do it," she replied, letting her voice convey sincerity. "Now I'll go make that tea. Ginger lemon okay?" "That's perfect," he said, exhaling a subtle breath of relief. In the kitchen, Clara heated water on the stove, measuring out a pinch of fresh ginger, a squeeze of lemon, and a dab of honey. As the water simmered, she couldn't help but replay his words in her mind. He rarely expressed gratitude in such a personal way, and she was touched that he'd singled out her presence as comforting. She tried not to read too much into it. After all, caretaker roles often foster a sense of dependence and closeness. Still, a small part of her felt a glimmer of possibility that perhaps he was beginning to see her as more than just an employee. Focus, Clara, she told herself, gently stirring the teapot. Keep it professional. Yet even as she told herself this, her heart fluttered at the memory of his subdued voice in the study. When she returned with the tea, he was no longer behind the desk but standing near the window. She paused in the doorway, struck by the silhouette he made, the tall figure against the muted evening light, cane in one hand, the other lightly braced on the windowsill. He was gazing outside as though taking in the last remnants of day. But of course, he was supposed to be blind. She quelled a passing curiosity at how he always seemed to orient himself so precisely. "Here we go," she said softly, approaching. "Let me set it on the side table." Benjamin nodded, stepping aside. "Thanks." She set the teacup down and guided his hand to the handle. As he lifted the cup, she noticed his shoulders were still tense, as though weighed by thoughts. And indeed, he was thinking, reflecting on how he'd nearly let himself slip, gazing out the window. He forced a slight tilt of his head, as if approximating the direction of her voice. "Busy day, huh?" she asked, hoping small talk might ease him. He offered a faint smile. "Yes. The doctor's appointment? Then these documents? I'm tired, but the tea helps." His voice held a nuance of truth. The day had been nerve-wracking. The appointment, the secret, the worry of tripping up in front of Clara. Mentally, it was exhausting to sustain a lie so completely. Clara nodded in sympathy. "Maybe after you finish your tea you can rest a bit. I can heat up some leftover soup for dinner later so you don't have to fuss with anything." He sipped gingerly. "That would be nice." A short silence followed, broken only by the tick of the old clock in the hallway. Then, as if compelled by a sudden honesty, he added, "I'm not used to people taking care of me, you know. I spent a lot of time on my own. So, some days are an adjustment." Her heart squeezed. She recognized that admission as a step toward letting her in. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes," she said gently. "It doesn't mean you're weak." He let out a soft chuckle. "I know. Hard to reframe it in my head, though." She watched him for another moment. This man with carefully measured movements, tinted glasses, polite gratitude. So many layers she hadn't fully uncovered. Finally, with a small smile, she excused herself, leaving him to his tea and thoughts. That evening, Clara found herself with a rare hour of free time. Benjamin had dozed off in his armchair after dinner, lulled by the hush of the house. She decided to take a walk around the block. The crisp autumn air felt invigorating as she strolled past well-trimmed lawns and tidy fences. Neighbors were either indoors or quietly minding their own business, so the street lay mostly empty. She found comfort in the gentle glow of streetlights against the deepening sky. As she passed Linda's house, the older woman gave a quick wave from her porch swing. Clara returned the gesture but kept walking, enjoying the solitude. She let her thoughts drift, marveling at how quickly her routine had centered around Benjamin's needs. She didn't resent it, not at all. But it felt different, like she was stepping into a caretaker role that felt more personal than any she'd had before. She reminded herself that she was employed to do exactly this, yet the lines were already beginning to blur in her mind. Eventually, she circled back to the house. In the driveway, she noticed a slick black car that definitely wasn't hers or Benjamin's. She paused, frowning. The silhouette of a man leaned casually against the hood, talking on a cell phone. He wore a well-tailored suit that, in the moonlight, gave off a faint sheen. She approached cautiously, heart pounding. "Excuse me, can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The man turned, revealing a handsome, clean-cut face. His posture was confident, maybe even smug. "Yes, I was wondering if Mr. Davis was available," he said, voice smooth. "I'm a friend." She eyed him warily. He didn't look like the typical neighbor or an old buddy. Everything about him screamed money, from the shine of his shoes to the expensive watch glinting on his wrist. "He didn't mention expecting anyone," she replied. "Your name?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's say it's an old acquaintance. I just dropped by to see how he's doing. Is he inside?" Clara's protective instincts flared. "He's resting," she said firmly. "And if you're an old acquaintance, you should probably call ahead next time." The man raised an eyebrow, looking bemused. "Didn't realize he was so insulated. Mind if I leave a message at least?" She hesitated. "You can give me your name and I'll let him know you stopped by." He clicked his tongue in mild disapproval. "Right, it's better if I talk to him directly." He slid a business card from his pocket and extended it. "Here, let him know Jonathan Black was here and that I'll be in town for a few days." Reluctantly, Clara took the card. She could barely make out the embossed letters by the porch light. "Okay, Mr. Black, I'll pass the message along." "Thanks." He gave a curt nod, then walked around to the driver's side of the sleek sedan. Before getting in, he paused, glancing back. "Tell him I'm quite eager to catch up. I'm sure he remembers me." With that cryptic remark, he climbed into the car and eased away, engine purring softly into the night. Clara stood in the driveway, unsettled. She glanced down at the card. It listed a name, an address in Manhattan, and an expensive-sounding consultancy firm. Nothing about it rang a bell for her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this Jonathan Black wasn't just a random friend. His manner reeked of confidence, no, of entitlement, as if he were used to doors opening for him. After a moment's hesitation, she tucked the card into her pocket, resolved to tell Benjamin in the morning. Something about it told her that waking him to share this news might not be wise, especially if Mr. Black brought stress. For now, she'd let him rest. That night, Clara didn't sleep well. She tossed and turned, dreaming of men in expensive suits knocking on the door, demanding to see Benjamin. Each time she tried to speak, the dream men turned to her with cryptic smiles, as though mocking her attempts to protect him. She'd wake in a tangle of sheets, heart racing, only to realize it was the middle of the night and the house was quiet. At dawn, she rose, bleary-eyed, and resolved to share the encounter with Benjamin after breakfast. She found him in the kitchen, measuring coffee grounds into a filter with careful, practiced motions. The tinted glasses were perched on his nose, the gentle early light casting a faint reflection off the lenses. "Morning," he greeted, somewhat cheerier than usual. She forced a smile. "Morning, you're up early." He lifted a shoulder in a mild shrug. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd try making coffee myself. I'm trying to be a bit more self-sufficient." Despite her unsettled night, she found warmth in his small step toward independence. "That's great. Let me just wash my hands and I'll join you." He nodded. As she rinsed her hands in the sink, he fumbled with the coffee pot, almost spilling water. Clara instinctively reached out, steadying it. He flashed her a sheepish grin. "Maybe I'm not as smooth as I hoped." "You'll get there," she teased, gently. "But hey, there's something I need to tell you. Last night a man showed up in the driveway. He said his name was Jonathan Black, gave me his card, asked to see you." Benjamin stiffened noticeably. His hand froze over the coffee pot. "Jonathan Black?" he repeated, voice tight. "He came here?" She nodded, rummaging in her pocket for the business card, then placed it on the counter near him. "Yes. He wouldn't give many details, just said he was an old acquaintance. Seemed insistent." Benjamin's jaw clenched. She might not have seen it behind his glasses, but the tension radiated through his posture. "I see. That's surprising. I didn't expect him to track me down." He took a breath, feigning calm. "Probably just someone from my old life. I'll decide how to handle it." His words made Clara's curiosity flare. Old life? She knew he'd had a life before the accident, but how wide was that circle of acquaintances? "Do you want me to call him, or should I say you're not available?" He paused. "For now, just hold off. I need to think." She inclined her head. "All right. If he comes by again, just tell him I'm out," Benjamin cut in, voice firmer than usual. Then he forced a small, apologetic smile. "Sorry. I don't mean to be abrupt. This is just not something I want to deal with right now." Clara read the anxiety in the set of his shoulders and decided not to push further. "I understand. I'll leave it to you." Inside, Benjamin felt alarm bells ringing. Jonathan Black was an old business associate from his real life, an ambitious investor who'd often hovered on the periphery of Lancaster enterprises. Why on earth would Jonathan come looking for him here under the name Ben Davis? Had he begun suspecting something? Or perhaps he was after a favor, having traced the minimal clues that remained of Benjamin's existence? Either way, it jeopardized everything. He took a breath, searching for calm as he flipped the coffee machine's switch. He had to maintain composure in front of Clara to keep her from growing suspicious. "Let's not worry about it," he said, voice subdued. "I'm sure it's nothing big." She nodded, though the small crease in her brow suggested she sensed more to the story. The machine gurgled, releasing the aroma of fresh coffee, momentarily masking the tension that filled the kitchen. Even so, the silence that settled between them brimmed with unspoken concerns. She considered asking more questions but chose not to push him right now. As they sipped coffee, the conversation drifted elsewhere. Plans for errands, a grocery list, the possibility of going to a local market that afternoon. Yet in the back of her mind, Clara's curiosity simmered. Who was Jonathan Black, and why did the mention of his name bring such unease to Benjamin's features? She reminded herself that sometimes the chronically ill, or in her assumption the visually impaired, had complicated lives left behind. But she couldn't shake a small, lingering feeling that there was more to Mr. Davis's story than he admitted. And for Benjamin, every sip of coffee felt like swallowing lumps of dread. If Jonathan suspected anything, the carefully woven lie could unravel. This caretaker, who'd shown him such genuine compassion, might look at him differently, maybe with betrayal, once she found out. His mind roiled with half-formed plans. Ignore Jonathan, pay him off, or maybe warn Stephen. The only certainty was that he had to protect the fragile bubble he'd built here with Clara, at least until he had clarity on her intentions. If he let Jonathan disrupt that, he might lose the one person who'd shown him unconditional kindness. They finished breakfast, each lost in separate worries. A faint wind rattled the windows, as though the house itself braced for a storm. Neither fully understood the significance of that short driveway encounter from the night before, but both sensed something had changed. An outside force had entered their little domain, and it threatened to tear away the veils they hid behind. Would you like me to continue with section 610? O1 Pro. Você disse yes. O ChatGPT disse 610. Pensou por 3M20s 610. Clara decided that fresh air might clear the tension lingering from Jonathan Black's unexpected visit. Around mid-morning, she suggested a walk to the neighborhood park. It wasn't far, just a few blocks, and although Benjamin hesitated at first, he eventually agreed. Perhaps he too sensed that staying cooped up in the house with growing worries about old acquaintances wasn't good for either of them. The sky glowed with a crisp autumn hue, leaves just beginning to show yellow edges. Clara walked steadily beside Benjamin, her hand lightly under his elbow as they navigated the sidewalk. She noticed that he carried his cane with extra deliberation as if to reassert his blindness in public. When a neighbor out for a jog passed by, they exchanged a quick greeting. Clara was careful to give no hint that anything was amiss. "You're quiet," she remarked softly as they neared the park entrance, a small wrought-iron gate that opened onto a walking path. "Is it about your friend who showed up last night?" Benjamin's jaw tensed. His first instinct was to deny it, but something about Clara's gentle tone coaxed an honest response. "Maybe," he admitted. "I just didn't expect him. Our paths parted some time ago." Clara nodded, guiding him along the paved path that wound under tall, leafy trees. A few children played on swings in the distance, their laughter echoing through the mild breeze. It's understandable if it unsettled you. People from your past can carry memories or obligations you might not want to face. He kept his gaze lowered, tinted glasses hiding any flicker of real sight. You have no idea, he murmured, so softly she almost missed it. They found a bench near a pond where ducks glided lazily. Clara helped Benjamin settle onto the bench, then sat beside him, leaving enough space that he wouldn't feel crowded. Silence stretched, filled with birdsong and distant chatter of park-goers. Finally, she asked, "Is there anything you'd like to tell me? It might help just to talk it out. No judgments." He inhaled, weighed down by the reality that any honesty about Jonathan Black would risk unmasking his own secrets. "Not much to say," he said at last. "He was involved in some business ventures of mine back when I still thought my life would be a certain way. Now it's different. I don't want to reopen old wounds." She studied his profile, noticing the slightest hint of sadness in his expression. "I understand," she replied gently. "But if he's in town, he might persist in trying to see you. Do you plan to ignore him?" Benjamin turned his head as though gazing in her direction. "Yes. If he comes by again, just tell him I'm not available." He paused, exhaling. "Let me handle the rest." Clara gave a slow nod. She wanted to offer reassurance, but also felt wary about pushing him. Whatever Jonathan Black represented, it clearly stirred unease. "All right," she said simply. "I won't press you." As they sat there, an elderly woman feeding ducks approached, offering them a friendly smile. Clara and Benjamin exchanged brief pleasantries with her, and the woman continued on her way. The brief encounter reminded Clara how ordinary it could feel to be out in the world, away from hushed anxieties and legal documents. She longed for more simple moments like these, ones not overshadowed by secrets. Yet, despite the tranquil setting, Clara remained aware of an emotional wall around Benjamin. He tried to appear relaxed, tilting his head to listen to the ducks, occasionally offering a dry comment about how he used to feed them as a child, a half-truth he constructed. But she sensed the tension behind his mask. Deep down, she found herself wanting to be the person who broke through that wall, who gave him a space to open up. It was risky. She had to remain professional. But caretaker roles often blurred these lines, especially when the patient seemed so lonely. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, turning slightly toward him. He parted his lips, but no sound emerged at first. In truth, Benjamin felt a complicated swirl of guilt and longing. Sitting beside Clara, hearing the sincerity in her voice, made him yearn to confide in her fully. But how could he? The secret he carried, pretending to be blind just to test her authenticity, undermined everything genuine she showed him. He trailed off, weighing his words. "I'm trying to figure out how to navigate life in the present without letting the past intrude." "That makes sense," she said, sliding just a bit closer, though still giving him space. "The past can be heavy." He gave a faint nod. "It can. But I appreciate you being here, helping me see the good parts of what's around me." The phrasing struck her, and for a moment, she felt a small flutter in her chest. Yet she tempered it, reminding herself he likely meant it in a general sense. "I'm glad," she answered, though her voice carried a warm softness. They lingered at the park longer than planned, enjoying the mild breeze and the occasional flurry of autumn leaves drifting down. Eventually, Clara guided him back along the path, passing a small kiosk selling hot pretzels. The smell was too tempting to resist. She approached the vendor, excitedly describing the toppings to Benjamin: salt, cinnamon sugar, mustard. He let out a genuine laugh when she offered to feed him bits of the pretzel. "I think I can manage," he joked, humor peeking through his guarded demeanor. When they headed home, Clara felt as though a bit of weight had lifted from Benjamin's mood. The specter of Jonathan's arrival might still loom, but at least for a little while, they'd found an easy companionship in the park, free from watchers or old obligations. That companionship was tested later that afternoon. Clara was in the living room, flipping through a home care magazine while Benjamin rested upstairs. The landline rang, again, and she picked up, bracing herself. "Hello?" "Yes, hello," an unfamiliar female voice said. "I'm looking for Ben Davis. Is he in?" Clara's pulse sped up, another stranger. "He's resting. May I ask who's calling?" The pause on the line was shorter than last time, more direct. "It's Rachel Ortiz. I'm an old friend. I heard he was in town and wanted to reconnect." Yet again that phrase, an old friend. A warning prickle ran through Clara's mind. Two visitors from his past in as many days? Something was definitely up. "I'm sorry," she said, voice carefully calm. "He hasn't mentioned you. Is it urgent?" A sharp exhale on the other end. "Look," Rachel said, tone bordering impatience. "It's important I speak to him. Please tell him I'll be at the Rivera Hotel for the next week if he wants to get in touch. Otherwise, I'll just stop by in person." Clara stiffened, hating the subtle threat in Rachel's words. "I'll let him know. Good day." She hung up, her mind swirling. Another well-dressed visitor? Another piece of his so-called past? She was starting to sense that Benjamin's old life might be far more complex than he admitted. Whether it was business associates, family, or something else, these arrivals were not random coincidences. Though she didn't like hiding things, she decided to wait until he came downstairs. She wouldn't wake him just to share more stress. But the phone call hung heavy in the air. Did she really know Benjamin at all? When he finally emerged, glasses in place and cane tapping lightly on the banister, Clara let him settle on the sofa before speaking. Her posture was tense, arms folded. He picked up on it immediately. "Everything all right?" She exhaled. "Someone named Rachel Ortiz called while you were resting. Says she's an old friend who wants to see you. She'll be staying at the Rivera Hotel for a week." Benjamin's face went pale, tension flooding his jaw. "Rachel, too?" he muttered under his breath, bitterness tinging his tone. Clara studied him. "Yes, that's what she said." She sounded insistent, like Jonathan. "Who are these people, really? Are they just random acquaintances?" He hesitated, mind racing for a credible half-truth. "They're from my prior work," he said vaguely. "We parted ways. They're probably trying to re-establish contact for personal gain." Her lips pressed into a line. She sensed the avoidance but didn't push him yet. They both had the same tone, like they'd find you no matter what. "Are you sure ignoring them is the best idea?" Benjamin swallowed. He knew how relentless Rachel could be. She was an old flame of sorts, someone who, in his life as Benjamin Lancaster, had connections to certain investments. She'd tried leveraging their relationship before, and now, if she tracked him under this alias, it spelled serious trouble. "Yes," he insisted quietly. "I don't want them in my life. I can handle it, Clara. Just trust me on this." Trust me on this. The words hung in the air. She offered a reluctant nod. "Okay, but if they show up again, I can't just turn them away unless I have a stronger explanation." He sighed, clearly torn. "Then tell them I have no interest in speaking to them, that I'm dealing with health issues. Anything." Clara frowned, worry knitting her brow. "I'm not comfortable lying for you, Mr. Davis. Maybe it's better if you just talk to them. Let them know you need space." His voice tightened. "I wish it were that simple." For a moment, conflict brewed between them. Clara felt caught between her sense of honesty and her desire to honor his wishes. She also felt protective of him. She didn't want him to be ambushed by people who might exploit him. Meanwhile, Benjamin wrestled with the knowledge that the more he stonewalled Rachel and Jonathan, the more suspicious Clara might become. Yet he couldn't risk letting these two anywhere near his carefully constructed lie. Finally, he forced himself to soften. "Clara, I value your help more than I can say. You're right, you shouldn't have to lie. But please, for now, can we just postpone dealing with them? I'm not ready." My life is complicated enough as it is." She studied his posture, the slump of his shoulders, the faint tremor in his voice. "All right," she relented. "I won't seek them out, but if they come back here, I'll tell them you're not seeing visitors. That's all I can do." He relaxed slightly. "Thank you." That evening, an uneasy silence blanketed the house. Clara busied herself with chores, then retreated to her room early, her mind spinning with questions. Who were Jonathan and Rachel really? Why were they so determined to see Benjamin? And why did it rattle him so deeply? In her experience as a caretaker, she'd learned that some patients shut the door on old friends after a traumatic life event, unwilling to face reminders of what they'd lost. If that was Benjamin's situation, it made sense. Yet something in her gut insisted there was more to the story. Some layer of secrecy beyond a mere desire for privacy. Meanwhile, Benjamin paced in his study, phone in hand, trying to call Stephen. It went straight to voicemail. Growling with frustration, he left a terse message. "Stephen, it's me. Jonathan and Rachel are both here, sniffing around. Call me ASAP. This can't blow up. I need your help." He ended the call, chest tight. If these two were circling, it meant they either smelled a business deal or suspected something about his disappearance. In either case, they'd dig until they got answers. He glanced at the door, thinking of Clara, her kindness, her genuine heart. The thought of losing her respect or seeing her heartbreak if she discovered the lie pained him more than he'd expected. And so another night passed under the same roof, both of them haunted by questions neither could openly ask. Soon enough, those questions would demand answers. But for now, all they had was the fragile bond they'd forged, and the hope it might survive whatever came next. Would you like me to continue with Section 710? O1 Pro, você disse yes ao ChatGPT disse solicitação de O1 Pro Mode, terminou de refletir, 710. After a restless night, Benjamin woke early to the sound of faint rain against the windows. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling he could see perfectly but pretended not to. Everything felt heavier now that Jonathan and Rachel had surfaced. They were like circling vultures, threatening his fragile refuge, and he still hadn't heard back from Stephen. He considered calling again, but it was barely 6 in the morning. He thought better of it. Maybe the attorney was out of town or simply not near his phone. He rose slowly, slipping on a casual sweater and jeans, deliberately choosing garments that looked simpler, more modest for his supposed new life. After all, a man with a genuine disability and limited means wouldn't be wearing custom-tailored suits. He caught himself in the mirror, glancing at the shape of his face. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed the sleeplessness. In the partial reflection, he saw the tinted glasses set on the bedside table, his ever-present prop. A weary sigh escaped his lips as he reached for them. Another day of half-truths stretched before him. Downstairs, Clara had already brewed coffee. He found her in the kitchen, hair tied back in a loose ponytail, rummaging through the fridge for ingredients. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the soft hiss of rain outside. Despite the tension from yesterday, she greeted him with a gentle smile. "Morning, Mr. Davis," she said, sliding a mug across the counter. "Coffee's ready. Did you sleep okay?" "Benjamin," he corrected with a subdued chuckle. "Please, just call me Benjamin." She hesitated, searching his tinted glasses for some clue to his mood. "All right," she finally conceded. "Benjamin, are you feeling any better today?" He took a slow sip of coffee, feigning caution as though unsure of the mug's exact position. "A bit," he managed. "The storm in my head is bigger than the one outside, but I'm coping." Clara offered a small nod, compassion evident in her eyes. "That's something." She took the initiative, placing a bowl of fruit on the table. "I was thinking we could have a light breakfast. Maybe toast, fruit, and scrambled eggs." "That sounds nice," he said. Then he set the mug down carefully. "Listen, about Jonathan and Rachel. Thank you for dealing with them. I know it's inconvenient." Her posture stiffened a bit at the mention of the visitors. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly, "but it does worry me. They're obviously determined. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I'm still waiting on someone who can help me sort this out. He trailed off, not wanting to name Stephen and reveal too much. But until then, please keep telling them I'm unavailable. Clara pressed her lips together in a thoughtful line. I understand. Just promise you'll be careful. They sounded... Well, one of them sounded a bit pushy. The woman, Rachel, had that tone of not taking no for an answer. Benjamin forced a dry laugh. She's always been like that. Then he drew in a calming breath. Let's try not to dwell on it, okay? Maybe we can do something else today to keep our minds off it. Clara nodded, the tension around her shoulders easing slightly. Sure. Actually, I had an idea. I noticed that old trunk in the upstairs storage closet the other day. We haven't gone through it. Maybe it has some leftover supplies or something we could use. Benjamin grimaced inwardly. He remembered the trunk from the property's prior owner. He wasn't sure what might be inside, but rummaging through a dusty trunk could be a decent distraction. All right, he agreed. After breakfast, we can check it out. They ate in near silence, the clink of cutlery punctuating the background drip of rain. Every so often, Clara's gaze flicked to Benjamin, wondering if he was truly as calm as he pretended. He, in turn, sensed her concern but offered no more information. By the time they finished their meal, the tension had grown quieter, as if both decided to put on a brave face. Upstairs, the storage closet was at the end of the hall, near Clara's guest room. It was a narrow space crammed with miscellaneous boxes. Clara had discovered the trunk on her first week in the house, but never opened it, unsure if it contained personal items Benjamin wanted to keep private. Now, with his permission, she pushed aside some cardboard boxes and knelt beside the trunk's old brass locks. Benjamin remained standing in the hallway, leaning on his cane, tinted glasses reflecting the overhead light. Any label on it? He asked. She brushed dust from the lid. Not really, she said, testing the latch. It clicked open with a little effort. She lifted the lid, unveiling a collection of folded blankets, some musty clothes, and a few old hardcover books. The smell of stale air wafted out. Clara wrinkled her nose. Smells like it's been sealed for decades. Benjamin arched an eyebrow behind his glasses. Probably has. What do you see? She carefully pulled out the blankets, shaking them gently. They seemed old but in decent condition. Next came the clothes, faded sweaters, a pair of slacks from some earlier era. Nothing special so far, she murmured, setting them aside. Then she spotted something unusual at the bottom, a small wooden box with carved flowers on the lid. This is interesting, she said, lifting it out. It's locked, though. Benjamin, curious despite himself, stepped into the closet with cautious steps, letting her guide him closer. A wooden box? He repeated. Wonder what's inside. Clara ran her fingertips over the carving. There's a little keyhole here, but no sign of a key in the trunk. She set it on top of the trunk, rummaging through the last of its contents. Just some old letters, a few more books. Wait, these letters have addresses. Huh. They're addressed to someone named Millicent. Benjamin tilted his head. Millicent, maybe the previous owner? Clara shrugged, scanning the faded envelopes. Possibly. Should I open one? He hesitated. It's not our mail, though the house is ours now. Still, it might feel intrusive. She gave him a thoughtful glance. You're probably right. But it's also possible the letters are decades old and have no significance. Let's see if they mention anything about a key. Otherwise, the box remains a mystery. With gentle care, she slid out one envelope, noticing the postmark was from over 20 years ago. She opened it slowly. It's dated 1998, she murmured, eyes skimming the neat handwriting. It's from someone named Harriet writing to Millicent about life changes, selling a property. She trailed off, scanning. Oh, it mentions a small carved box that Harriet left with Millicent, containing keepsakes from their mother. Harriet hopes Millicent keeps it safe. Benjamin felt a flicker of intrigue. "So that's probably the same box we're looking at." Clara nodded, setting the letter down. "They might have parted ways or lost touch. Harriet told Millicent never to throw it out. Seems it had sentimental value." "Well, I guess that's our answer," Benjamin said softly. "It's a personal keepsake. We should leave it be, right?" Clara looked at the box again, curiosity warring with respect for privacy. "I suppose so," she agreed. "Though part of me wonders if we should try to contact Harriet or Millicent in case they still want it. But we have no idea if they're alive." He sighed. Given how old those letters are, it might be difficult to track them down. She replaced the letters and the wooden box, carefully returning everything to the trunk. "Maybe we can store it back in here for now. If we stumble upon a clue or someone who knows these folks, we can mention it." Benjamin nodded. "Sounds fair." He reached out, running his hand along the trunk's rough edge, making sure to appear as though he was feeling for it. One more mystery of this house. She smiled a little at that, softly closing the trunk's lid. "At least it was a harmless one," she said. Then her eyes flicked toward him. "We should get out of this dusty closet before we start sneezing." He chuckled, letting her guide him out. They returned the trunk to its spot and replaced the boxes. Outside, the hallway felt oddly bright after the dim, cramped space. Once they'd washed their hands of the dust, Clara retreated to the kitchen for some water. She found a moment to reflect on how different searching through an old trunk felt compared to dealing with Jonathan or Rachel. One was a gentle curiosity about the past, the other a looming threat. She couldn't help but compare the trunk's locked box to Benjamin's own secrets. Neither had an easy key. She felt her caretaker instincts flaring, wanting to help him more deeply, but every attempt to ask about his past left him guarded. She decided to let him set the pace, at least for now. Late afternoon brought a phone call at last, this time to Benjamin's personal cell. Clara was in the living room tidying up when she heard the low buzz from the study. She paused, uncertain whether to go fetch him, but soon he emerged on his own, cane tapping lightly on the floor. "Clara?" he asked, voice resonating with a subdued urgency. "Yes? Did someone call?" He nodded, feigning the tilt of a blind man. "It was Stephen. He's on his way here." She blinked, surprised. "Coming here? Does that mean he'll arrive tonight?" "He said maybe tomorrow morning or late tonight if he can manage. He's finishing some business upstate, but he insisted on speaking in person." Benjamin exhaled, tension etched into the lines of his face. "So this might help me figure out the Jonathan and Rachel situation." Clara felt a wash of relief. Maybe Stephen was the ally who could properly handle these intruders from Benjamin's past. "That's good," she said. "Do you think he'll want to stay over? Should I prepare a guest room?" Benjamin shook his head. "He'll likely just pop in, handle what's needed, and leave. Stephen's not the sit-and-chat type, but thank you for offering." She nodded, making a mental note to at least tidy the main floor in case the lawyer needed to stay or go through documents. "All right. Let me know if you want me around for the meeting or if you'd prefer privacy." His expression softened slightly. "I appreciate that. I'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll need your help summarizing documents or something." Then he lifted a hand, rubbing his temple. "Everything's so tangled, Clara." She touched his arm gently. "Sometimes tangles can be undone if we face them," she said in a low voice, not wanting to sound pushy. "You don't have to do it alone." He offered a hint of a grateful smile. "We'll see. For now, let's just get through dinner. I'm sure tomorrow will be a big day." Dinner was a modest affair. Roast chicken, vegetables, and a small salad. Clara sensed Benjamin's distraction, noticing how he occasionally paused mid-meal as though lost in thought. She tried to keep the conversation light, chatting about the trunk find and the letters. He mustered polite interest but was clearly preoccupied. Afterward, he retreated upstairs early, claiming he needed to gather some digital documents for Stephen. Clara busied herself washing dishes and tidying the kitchen. She found comfort in the rhythmic task, clinging to the hope that Stephen's arrival would bring clarity. Yet once the dishes were done, she stood by the sink, staring at the reflection of the dimly lit kitchen in the window. Her mind wandered. Suppose Stephen's presence only escalates things. Suppose Jonathan or Rachel returns, demanding to see Benjamin. The hush of the suburban street outside felt like the calm before a storm. Still, as caretaker, she had to focus on her role. Patience, she murmured to herself. Give him the space he needs. She turned off the lights and climbed to her own room, deciding to get some rest. Yet rest did not come easily. That night, Clara dreamed of a locked wooden box again. In her dream, she walked through an empty house, identical to Benjamin's, but with corridors that never ended. She carried the carved box, searching for a key, hearing voices echo from unseen rooms. Jonathan and Rachel's voices? Possibly. Their laughter filled the halls, mocking her attempts to find a way out. Then, behind a door, she sensed Benjamin's presence. She opened it, only to find a blank space where he was supposed to be. A wave of dread washed over her, and she jolted awake. Breathing hard, she realized it was just after 3 a.m. Rain still pattered on the roof. She lay there, listening to the darkness, her heart pounding. She told herself it was only a nightmare, but it fed her growing conviction that Benjamin's secrets ran deeper than she'd guessed. She slipped out of bed and padded quietly to the window. In the faint glow of a street lamp, she saw no strange cars in the driveway, no silhouettes lurking outside. The house seemed quiet, no sign that Stephen had arrived late in the night. She sighed, climbing back under the covers, hoping that dawn would bring answers rather than more questions. Dawn did come, timid and pale, revealing another damp morning. And with it, the distant hum of an approaching car engine. Clara rose, quickly throwing on a robe, and peeked out the window. A silver sedan turned into the driveway. A slender, neatly dressed man stepped out, glancing up at the house. Stephen, she assumed. Her heart thumped. This was Benjamin's lawyer, and presumably his closest confidant. Might he also hold the key to unraveling all these tensions? She hurried downstairs to greet him. By the time she opened the door, Stephen was already poised to knock. He looked to be in his early 40s, with a crisp suit and alert brown eyes that sized her up briefly. "Good morning," Clara said, forcing a polite smile. "You must be Stephen." He nodded curtly. "And you must be Clara, the caretaker." His tone was courteous but brisk, as though everything about him was calibrated for efficiency. "I'm here to see Mr. Davis." Clara stepped aside. "Of course. Come in. He's—" But Stephen had already brushed past her, scanning the foyer, his eyes taking in the subtle details. Clara closed the door behind him, watching as the lawyer turned the corner into the living room with apparent familiarity. She followed, uneasy. Something about Stephen felt like a man always on a mission, leaving no time for pleasantries. Benjamin, hearing voices, emerged from the hallway. "Stephen?" he called, adopting the same careful, searching posture that signaled his blindness. "You're here." "Yes," Stephen responded, approaching with subdued urgency. "We need to talk." He shot a glance at Clara, then back at Benjamin. "Privately, if possible." Benjamin hesitated, torn between including Clara, who was also his caretaker, and maintaining secrecy. Ultimately, he sighed. "Clara, could you give us a few minutes?" Though curiosity burned in her, she respected his request. "Sure. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." As she walked away, she couldn't help a final glance over her shoulder. Stephen's face was already etched with intense conversation, and Benjamin looked more tense than she'd ever seen. If this was the man who orchestrated Mr. Davis's affairs, then perhaps the house was about to see the unveiling of secrets. In the kitchen, Clara busied herself preparing coffee, straining to catch fragments of their muted conversation. She picked up words like Rachel, Jonathan, danger, and cover. Her pulse quickened. cover, danger. The puzzle pieces began to shift into place, though not yet forming a clear picture. She placed the coffee tray on the counter, waiting, half dreading, half hoping, that after this conversation, Benjamin might choose to confide in her. Already she sensed the wind of change rattling at the windows, a silent promise that illusions wouldn't hold much longer. She inhaled deeply, willing herself to remain calm. Whatever revelations would come, she had to be ready. The caretaker in her braced for the possibility that after today everything might be different, maybe for better, maybe for worse. But one way or another, the secrets around Benjamin Davis could no longer remain quietly locked away. O pro. Você disse. Yes. O ChatGPT disse. Solicitação de pro mod. Pensou por 3.554 From the kitchen, Clara could hear the low murmur of Benjamin and Stephen's conversation in the living room. The voices rose and fell, sometimes urgent, other times hushed to near silence. She lingered by the counter where she'd set out a tray with coffee cups, resisting the urge to walk in and eavesdrop. Instead, she busied herself rearranging utensils in a drawer that hardly needed it, straining her ears for anything more than indistinct phrases. At last, the discussion seemed to pause. A moment later, Benjamin's cane tapped lightly on the floor, signaling his approach. Clara turned just as he stepped into the kitchen, tinted glasses in place, Stephen trailing close behind. "Clara," Benjamin said, voice subdued. "Would you mind bringing that coffee tray into the dining room? Stephen and I are going to continue talking in there." She recognized the careful note in his tone as though he was trying to keep calm. "Of course," she replied, lifting the tray. She glanced at Stephen, whose expression was politely unreadable. "Any sugar or cream?" Stephen shook his head once. "Black, thanks." Nodding, Clara led them into the dining room. It was a modest space with a round table draped in a pale blue cloth. Tall windows overlooked the front yard, where rain droplets still clung to the glass. Clara set the tray down, poured coffee into each mug, and handed one to Stephen, guiding Benjamin's hand to his own. "Thanks," Stephen said, still curt but polite. Benjamin cleared his throat. "Clara, Stephen and I have some matters to settle, but I'd actually like you to stay, at least for part of this discussion." He paused, as if gathering courage. "He might need your help with reading or referencing certain documents, and I think you should hear some of what's going on." Clara's surprise must have shone in her eyes because Stephen's jaw tightened momentarily. Still, he inclined his head in agreement, though his tone remained brisk. "Yes, well, if you want her present, that's your call." Benjamin exhaled, pulling out a chair. "Sit, please, both of you." Stephen waited until Clara sat down, then took the seat opposite Benjamin, setting his coffee aside. "We have a situation. Rachel Ortiz and Jonathan Black. They know you're here, and they're poking around. If they dig too deep—" "I know," Benjamin cut in, sounding both resigned and worried. "Clara's already had to deal with them showing up or calling. It's not fair to her." Clara folded her hands in her lap, heart pounding. "I only told them you weren't seeing visitors, but they didn't seem satisfied." Stephen nodded. "They won't stop. They have their motivations, likely money or leverage. If they realize who Ben Davis really is—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Clara's brow furrowed. I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying Mr. Davis isn't who he says he is?" She felt a prickle of unease at the corners of her mind. Benjamin's head bowed slightly. Behind the tinted glasses, his eyes squeezed shut in apprehension. "Clara, there's something I need to admit." His voice shook just enough for her to notice. "When you came to work for me, you only knew that I was a man who'd lost his sight in an accident and needed a caretaker. That's true as far as the job is concerned, but not the rest. I haven't been entirely honest." She stared at him, her pulse racing. "Honest about what?" Stephen broke in, voice measured. Clara, Ben Davis is an alias. Benjamin needed to step away from his former life, where he was well known and, let's say, targeted by opportunistic individuals. He chose to live quietly under a different name to see if he could find genuine relationships, people who weren't after his money or his public image. Clara felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. Wait, she said, turning to Benjamin. So you're not just some average guy starting over. You're someone with money? Power? Someone famous? Benjamin swallowed hard. Something like that. She had to take a moment to process, remembering Jonathan's slick car, Rachel's commanding tone. It made sense that they'd come hunting if Benjamin had serious wealth. Why not just tell me from the start? She asked, her voice lower now, laced with hurt. I would have taken the caretaker job regardless of your past. Stephen cut in again. He had reasons to test the sincerity of those around him. Too many people have used him for personal gain. We set up this ruse, the new identity, the story of losing his sight in an accident. Wait. Clara froze, her mind catching on the phrase. The story of losing his sight. Are you saying he's not actually... Benjamin's hand gripped the edge of the table. Clara, please, let me explain. His voice quavered, guilt evident. I really do know what it's like to feel alone, but I never lost my eyesight. I'm sorry. The final words landed like a blow. Clara stared at him, emotions clashing in her chest. Shock, betrayal, anger, confusion. For weeks she had guided him, rearranged the kitchen for him, protected him from strangers, all under the belief that he was blind. And now he was admitting it was a lie? She rose from her chair on trembling legs. You pretended? This whole time? Benjamin winced at her tone. Yes, he whispered, tinted glasses still on as if to hide, ironically, the sight he'd claimed not to have. Stephen cleared his throat, clearly sensing the tension. Clara, please understand, it was never meant to hurt you. It was to ensure that if someone was kind, they were doing it from genuine compassion, not greed. Clara felt her cheeks heat with anger. That doesn't make it okay. You used me. You lied every single day, making me believe I was caring for a blind man. She turned to Benjamin, voice breaking. You let me feel sorry for you. I rearranged my life around your supposed disability. Benjamin's hand shook on the tabletop. I know. I'm so sorry. But what I felt, my entire life, people only saw my wealth. I needed proof that someone could see me, the real me, without the influence of money or fame. Her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. I can't believe this, she murmured. All those times I tried to encourage you or guide you or comfort you, and it was based on a lie. She shoved her chair back, turning away, arms folded to contain her trembling. He flinched. Clara, I never wanted to hurt you. You're the only person who made me feel genuinely cared for. His voice cracked. I am terrified that if I told you the truth, you'd disappear like everyone else. Stephen interjected, more dispassionate. Look, Clara, I understand your anger, but we have bigger issues right now. Rachel and Jonathan are closing in. If they figure out Benjamin's alias, everything falls apart. They might try to exploit him again. You could help us keep the facade intact until we handle them. Clara swung around, her face flushed. Me? Help you lie even more? She let out a mirthless laugh. You're asking for my cooperation after you've deceived me? Why would I do that? Benjamin stood, taking an unsteady step forward. He raised a hand, then let it drop at his side as though afraid to reach out. Because beneath the lie, there's been something real between us. I know you must hate me right now, but if you walk away, I'll lose that one chance to prove that I can have a genuine bond with someone. She shook her head, tears threatening. How do I know anything between us was real at all? Every moment you played this role, faking bumps into furniture, wearing those glasses, letting me feed you some days. God, it's humiliating. His voice was thick with regret. I didn't want to humiliate you or manipulate you. I started out convinced no one could truly care for me. But then you—" He stopped, words failing. Clara closed her eyes, fighting the sting behind them. She wanted to hurl accusations, demand he vanish from her life. But a small, tortured part of her recalled the countless small gestures of kindness, the sincerity she'd sensed in their talks, the way he confessed he felt safe with her. Were those emotions all staged, or had there been glimpses of truth? Stephen cleared his throat again, clearly impatient. Time is short. We need to decide how to handle Rachel and Jonathan. Clara, if you choose to walk away, we'll respect that. But if you're willing to stay, you can help Benjamin keep this quiet until we neutralize the threat. After that, he can come clean publicly, or do whatever he decides. Clara pressed her fingertips to her temple, mind spinning. I'm sorry. This is just a lot. Benjamin's voice emerged softly. I understand. Take all the time you need. I will respect your choice. If you want to leave, I won't try to stop you. I only ask that you don't reveal my location or identity to them. Tears finally escaped, and she brushed them aside, anger mixing with hurt. I gave everything to be a good caretaker, she whispered. I was proud of how far you seemed to come, how you found ways to be independent despite blindness. But now I see it was just an act. He winced at her pained tone. Not everything was an act, he insisted, though he knew words might not convince her. My gratitude, my admiration, what I felt sharing small moments with you, those were real. But I get it if you don't believe me. She stood there, shaking, torn between fury and a strange compassion that still lingered. Part of her wanted to slap him. Another part wanted to comfort him for the pain that drove him to such extreme measures. In the end, she pressed her lips together, unable to speak. Stephen rose, placing a sheaf of documents onto the table. I need to finalize some steps for Benjamin's protection. Clara, you're welcome to leave the room if you want, or you can stay and hear what we plan. Your call. She inhaled unsteadily, her gaze flicking to Benjamin, who stood with bowed shoulders, tinted glasses hiding his eyes but not his remorse. For a long moment she wrestled with herself. Finally, she swallowed. I'll stay. I want to know what's going on, if only to decide what I'll do next. Benjamin released a trembling breath. Thank you. So she returned to her seat, arms folded defensively as Stephen laid out the threats posed by Jonathan and Rachel. She listened in stony silence as the lawyer described how these two might use blackmail or go to the media. She gleaned that Benjamin was a figure of great wealth with a family legacy to match. None of that softened the betrayal she felt. It only made her realize how carefully he'd orchestrated every lie. As the discussion wore on, she weighed her options. She could pack her bags and leave tonight, ignoring the pang in her chest. She could turn him into the tabloids, out of revenge, but that felt too cruel, not to mention unethical. Or she could stay a little longer, see if there was any chance Benjamin's remorse was genuine, help him fend off these so-called predators. Maybe then she'd figure out if there was anything left to salvage, or if she should walk away for good. By the time Stephen finished outlining his plan, Clara's head was spinning. She looked at Benjamin, took in the contrite slump of his posture, and realized they'd barely scratched the surface of the emotional mess between them. One thought circled in her mind. He'd lied to her from day one, but even so, she wasn't certain she could just vanish without answers. All right, she said, her voice subdued. I'll stay for now, at least until this Rachel and Jonathan situation is resolved. But don't misunderstand. I'm not forgiving you yet, she said, fixing Benjamin with a stern look, though tears still shimmered in her eyes. I just want to see how this ends. Benjamin's throat tightened. That's more than I deserve, he whispered. Thank you. Stephen nodded briskly, relief evident. Good. Then we keep the status quo until we neutralize them, no slip-ups. Clara, If they contact you, direct them to me or continue deflecting. In the meantime, we'll arrange a more permanent solution." Clara drew a shaky breath, turning her gaze to the window where raindrops continued to patter against the glass. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she answered the ad for a caretaker's job. Yet here she was, entangled in a web of deceit and danger. She pressed her trembling fingers to her temples and closed her eyes briefly, wishing she could rewind time. But there was no going back. The only path was forward, through truths that hurt and choices she never asked to make. For now, she would stay, if only to see whether Benjamin truly regretted his lies, or if he was just another manipulator in a wealthy world she'd never dreamed of entering. O1 Pro. Você disse? Yes. O ChatGPT disse, solicitação de O1 Pro Mod. Terminou de refletir 9:10. Throughout the rest of that morning, the house felt weighed down by the grim reality of the situation. Stephen made calls from Benjamin's study, speaking in hushed tones about securing confidentiality agreements and potential restraining orders. Benjamin remained closeted with him, occasionally stepping out to ask Clara for water or coffee. She obliged in tense silence, thoughts churning. She had announced her intention to stay until the Rachel and Jonathan threat was handled, but her resolve felt precarious. Each time she glimpsed Benjamin's tinted glasses, a surge of anger rose, remembering every moment she'd been duped. Yet beneath the anger, she felt a pang of sorrow for the lost trust and the awkward affection she'd once believed was mutual. By midday, the rain outside intensified, turning the windows into sheets of streaming water. Clara prepared a simple lunch, sandwiches, fruit, and tea, but found no appetite for herself. She set plates on the dining table, then knocked on the study door. "Lunch is ready," she said curtly. Stephen glanced up from a laptop, while Benjamin stood near the desk, arms folded. Both looked equally stressed. "Thanks," Benjamin said in a subdued tone. "We'll be out in a minute." She turned, giving Stephen a brief nod before returning to the kitchen. Minutes later, they both emerged and sat at the table with her, no one speaking initially. The atmosphere was awkward, heavy with unspoken tensions. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. Clara broke the silence. "So, does Rachel or Jonathan have any clue where you actually come from? I mean, if they track your identity—" She trailed off, shrugging. Stephen exchanged a glance with Benjamin. "They know him from his old life. But we've tried to sever records that link him to this property and the alias Ben Davis. The worry is that they'll guess who he really is if they keep snooping. They might approach the media or use blackmail." Clara fidgeted with her teacup, a swirl of frustration building again. "All of which could have been avoided if you'd just been honest with me. I could have helped from the start." Benjamin's shoulders sagged. "I was afraid of scaring you away." She let out a small, scoffing laugh. "Well, you ended up scaring me anyway, but in a different sense." A tense moment followed. Stephen cleared his throat, pushing his plate away. He'd barely touched the sandwich. "We have a plan to keep them at bay. I've contacted a private investigator who can quietly warn them off. If that doesn't work, we'll explore legal avenues. Meanwhile, Clara, we'd like you to maintain normalcy here. Continue your caretaker role so no one suspects a thing. That includes continuing the appearance of Benjamin's blindness, if Rachel or Jonathan show up." She stared at the lawyer. "This is so twisted. You want me to keep pretending he can't see?" Benjamin spoke up. "I know it's asking a lot, and you have every right to be angry. But if you can do this, it will save me from a bigger public scandal." Clara folded her arms. "And after this is resolved, what then? You go back to your real name and vanish from my life?" A flicker of hurt crossed Benjamin's face. "I don't know. Maybe I'll go back eventually. Or maybe I'll stay in this quieter life, but with truth this time." He lowered his gaze. "If you can stand the sight of me." She didn't respond. Instead, she rose from the table, gathered plates, and carried them to the sink. Her mind swirled with conflicting impulses. Part of her wanted to walk out the door, Leave them to their expensive lawyers and tangled secrets. Another part, a quieter, more compassionate side, still felt drawn to the glimpses of sincerity she'd seen in Benjamin. Her internal debate was interrupted by the jarring ring of the landline phone. She stiffened, glancing at Benjamin and Stephen. "I'll get it." They both stood. "Put it on speaker," Stephen said firmly. Clara nodded, picking up the receiver and pressing the speaker button. "Hello?" An all-too-familiar voice echoed through the static. Jonathan Black. "Ah, Caretaker, good you picked up. I was hoping to speak with your boss. Is he around?" Clara shot a look at Benjamin, who frowned deeply. Stephen gestured for her to keep calm. "Mr. Davis is resting," she said coolly. "He's not available." Jonathan made a faint tisking sound. "See, that's interesting because I happen to be outside, parked right down the road. I can see the lights on. Doesn't look like someone who's resting." A flush of anger rose in Clara's cheeks. So Jonathan was surveilling them now? She glanced at Stephen, who was mouthing, "Stay calm." Benjamin leaned closer, tension radiating from him. "I'd prefer if you didn't lurk around," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Davis isn't in the condition to deal with uninvited guests." Jonathan chuckled, a low, mocking sound. Sure. His condition. Well, Caretaker, I'm giving you a heads up. I've got some urgent matters to discuss with Mr. Davis, and I'm not leaving town until I do. So you can keep me at arm's length or let me in, your choice." Clara exhaled shakily. "We've told you, he can't see visitors." Silence hung on the line for a beat. Then Jonathan's voice dropped to a menacing undertone. "Is that so? Because I've heard rumors that your boss might be more capable than he lets on." Clara's throat constricted. Her gaze darted to Benjamin, who looked stricken. Stephen grabbed the phone from her hand, stepping in decisively. "Mr. Black, this is Stephen Monroe, attorney for Ben Davis. If you continue to harass my client—" "Harass?" Jonathan's laughter cut him off. "I'm doing him a courtesy, actually. I have information that will blow his little game wide open if he doesn't speak to me. So I suggest you watch your threats, counselor. I know who you really are, and I know who he really is." Benjamin's face paled. Stephen pressed his lips into a thin line. "If you release any slanderous allegations, we'll sue you for libel." "Slander, libel, who cares?" Jonathan said, voice dripping arrogance. "We all know there's enough proof to bury your client in a media circus, so let's not pretend. Tell him to meet me tomorrow at noon in the old dockside warehouse near the East Bridge. Alone. If he's not there, well, you'll see." Before Stephen could reply, Jonathan ended the call. The line clicked, leaving the three of them standing in tense silence, the phone's dial tone humming ominously. Stephen finally placed the receiver down. That escalated fast. Benjamin sank into the nearest chair, tinted glasses reflecting the overhead light. "He knows. Or at least he suspects," he muttered. "The warehouse. That's a place from one of our old deals. He's basically challenging me to come out of hiding." Clara hovered, hands pressed against her mouth. "He's blackmailing you, isn't he?" Stephen nodded grimly. "Sounds like it. He might have some documents that tie you to certain business dealings, or maybe he's bluffing." Benjamin exhaled shakily. "Either way, he wants a confrontation. If I don't go, he'll go public. If I do go, he'll probably demand money or some other favor. He's not going away easily." "And what about Rachel?" Clara asked, nerves on edge. Stephen shrugged. "Haven't heard from her yet, but they could be working together." Clara felt outrage spike. "You can't just march down to a shady warehouse. That sounds dangerous." Benjamin raked a hand through his hair. "Maybe I should. I need to face him somehow. Stephen, can we set up some legal intervention?" Stephen pursed his lips. "We could try an injunction or a restraining order, but that takes time, and Jonathan might leak everything before we see a judge. Honestly, if he's bluffing, calling his bluff could work, but if he's not—" A storm of thoughts whirled in Clara's mind. She wanted no part of clandestine meetings with blackmailers, yet she was entangled in it now. "This is insane," she whispered. "Couldn't you just walk away from him? Let him go to the press?" Benjamin removed the tinted glasses, rubbing his temples. He made sure not to raise his eyes too high, still wary of revealing the ease of his sight to Clara even now. "If it goes public, I might salvage my fortune, but the scandal would be huge. My family name, every philanthropic effort, I'd be ridiculed or accused of toying with people's empathy. I'd lose any chance of normalcy." Clara stared at him, empathy warring with resentment. She knew the media could be ruthless, especially with a story like this. "So you're actually considering meeting him?" Stephen blew out a breath. "If you do, at least let me hire security or go with you. Don't face him alone." Benjamin hesitated, glancing toward Clara. I have to handle it alone. If I bring a lawyer or bodyguards, Jonathan might just bolt, or worse, lash out. He wants me personally." Clara's heart twisted at the resigned look on his face. Despite her anger, she couldn't help imagining how frightened he must be. "You're going to walk in pretending to be blind?" she asked, voice trembling. Benjamin's lips curved into a humorless half-smile. "Yes, ironically enough, unless we want the ruse exposed on the spot." Stephen set his jaw. "This is risky, but maybe we can stage some backup at a distance. Clara," he turned to her, "I know you're not comfortable with more deception, but we might need you to keep up the caretaker role if Jonathan tries to show up here again before the meeting. Keep him calm, in the dark." She swallowed hard. "I'll do what I have to prevent this from blowing up, but don't mistake that for condoning the lies." Benjamin nodded. "I understand. Once this is over, I'll face the consequences of my actions. But first, let me see if I can resolve Jonathan's blackmail." A thick silence fell. The three of them remained there, caught in the swirl of half-formed plans. Outside, the rain hammered on, as though echoing the turmoil within the house. Finally, Stephen rose. "I'll call the investigator. We'll arrange some discreet backup at the warehouse tomorrow. Benjamin, we'll go over the logistics tonight." Benjamin stood as well, tinted glasses in hand. "Right. Thank you." Clara lingered, her mind churning. She wanted to protest, to say that no good could come of negotiating with a blackmailer, yet part of her saw no simple alternatives. When Stephen left to make calls, Benjamin turned to her, voice gentle. "Clara, I know you're angry, but having you here helps me stay sane. I'm sorry for dragging you into this." She looked away, arms crossed over her chest as though shielding her heart. "You dragged me into a lie from the moment I arrived, but I'm already in it now. Let's just focus on getting through tomorrow." He bowed his head, remorse etched across his features. "All right, if there's anything I can do," Clara inhaled, steadying herself. "I'll let you know," she said coolly, and left the room, ignoring the twinge of guilt at the wounded look on his face. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, her thoughts churned. In less than 24 hours, everything might come to a head. Jonathan's threat, Benjamin's facade, her own sense of betrayal, it all pressed in. She shut her door, leaning against it, her heart pounding. If tomorrow's showdown ended in disaster, she might lose whatever lingering faith she had in him. But if, by some miracle, they could handle Jonathan's threats and come clean about everything, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for understanding. One thing was certain, the illusions that had colored their lives were on the brink of shattering, and Clara, though still seething with anger, realized that beneath it all she wasn't sure she wanted to see Benjamin destroyed. Despite everything, a small seed of compassion refused to die. O1 Pro. Você disse yes o chat GPT disse solicitação de O1 Pro mode. Terminou de refletir, dance to 10. Morning arrived far too quickly, each hour burdened by the knowledge of what was to come. Clara was awake before dawn, haunted by restless dreams of shadowy warehouses and ominous figures lurking just out of sight. When she finally left her room, the house was already buzzing with subdued activity. Stephen was on the phone in the study, finalizing details of the plan, while Benjamin paced restlessly in the living room, tinted glasses perched on his nose. Clara entered the living room with hesitant steps. "Good morning," she murmured. Benjamin turned toward her voice, shoulders rigid. "Morning," he echoed. The hush of the house seemed magnified by the tension clinging to both of them. I hope you slept better than I did." She offered a small shake of her head. "No, not really." His mouth formed a tight line, regret flickering over his features. "I'm sorry. All of this is a nightmare." For a moment, a pang of sympathy shot through her. Even angry as she was, she could see how heavily the day weighed on him. "At least it'll be over soon," she said softly. "One way or another?" He nodded. "Yes, one way or another." By mid-morning, Stephen joined them in the living room, phone still in hand. He wore a crisp suit and a grim expression. "All right," he said, scanning the tension in the room. "I've spoken to the private investigator. He'll be in a car nearby, ready to intervene if things go south, but he won't move unless we give a signal." Benjamin rubbed the back of his neck. "And you're sure that's wise? Jonathan might notice any sign of a tail." Stephen exhaled. "We'll keep it subtle. But we can't let you meet a blackmailer alone, unprotected. At least this way, if he tries something more threatening than an extortion attempt, we can step in." Clara, arms folded, asked, "And what about me? Do I stay here, or—" Benjamin hesitated, then shook his head. "I'd prefer you stay safe at the house. But Stephen's worried Rachel might show up while I'm gone, or Jonathan might decide to have an accomplice check on the house." Stephen inclined his head. "Precisely. If Rachel arrives, keep deflecting her, and keep the house locked. We can't afford any infiltration. Jonathan's fairly predictable, but Rachel's the wild card." A swirl of dread coursed through Clara. She remembered Rachel's phone call, that steely undertone. "So I just pretend everything's normal, pretend Benjamin's here, blind and resting." Benjamin flinched at the mention of his fake blindness. "Yes," he admitted, voice subdued. "I know it's more deception, but please, just one last time." She looked at him, that old anger twisting with reluctant understanding. "All right, but then this ends." Benjamin exhaled deeply, relief mingled with sorrow in his eyes. "After today, no more lies," he promised. Time ticked by with agonizing slowness, and at 11:30, Stephen and Benjamin gathered in the entryway, preparing to leave for the warehouse. Clara stood a short distance away, arms hugged around herself. She couldn't help noticing the faint tremor in Benjamin's hands as he grasped the cane, a cane he didn't truly need. He must have seen her concern. With tinted glasses shielding his gaze, he turned toward her. I know I have no right to ask you for reassurance, but is there anything you want to say, in case this all goes wrong?" Clara's breath caught. For a moment, raw words clawed at her throat. Accusations, pleas, confessions. She wanted to ask if he'd truly cared about her, or if it was just convenient. But now wasn't the time. The man in front of her was about to risk everything, confronting a blackmailer who could ruin him. She settled on honesty that didn't compromise her anger. "I'm still angry, Benjamin, and I'm hurt, but—" Her voice softened despite herself. "Be careful. I don't want you getting hurt or humiliated. No matter how I feel about your lies, I don't want you destroyed." His chin dropped, relief mingling with regret. "Thank you," he whispered. "I'll be back. I promise." Stephen checked his watch. "We should go." He opened the door, and the two men stepped into the drizzling rain, disappearing into a discreet black sedan parked at the curb. Clara watched from the doorway, heart pounding, until the car turned the corner and vanished. Left alone in the house, she felt every second stretch into an eternity. She tried to keep busy, tidying the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless. The old clock on the wall ticked mercilessly. Noon would come soon, Then the confrontation, the unknown. The ring of the landline phone startled her out of her thoughts. She rushed to answer, pulse racing. "Hello? I'm looking for Mr. Davis," came a female voice. "Rachel, we have unfinished business." Clara steeled herself. "He's not available." "That's not surprising," Rachel said, her tone cool, "but I have no intention of waiting any longer." "Where is he?" Clara swallowed. He's resting. Are you always this pushy?" Rachel let out a short laugh. "I'm pushy because I know what's going on. Tell him if he keeps dodging me, I'll show up at the house in an hour. Let's see him pretend he can't see me." She hung up before Clara could respond. An icy tremor slid down Clara's spine. The last thing she needed was Rachel barging in. She glanced at the clock. 11:50. Benjamin and Stephen would just be arriving at the warehouse. She grabbed her cell phone, tried calling Stephen. No answer, it went straight to voicemail. She tried Benjamin's cell, but it too rolled to voicemail. They were likely en route or preparing for the confrontation, phones set to silent. "Damn it," she muttered. She'd have to handle Rachel herself. At the warehouse near the East Bridge, the air felt thick with humidity and the smell of old metal. Rain dripped through broken skylights, forming puddles on the concrete floor. Jonathan Black stood near a cluster of crates, arms folded, as the black sedan pulled up to a sagging doorway. He wore an expensive trench coat, exuding a calm confidence despite the rundown surroundings. Benjamin stepped out first, tapping his cane on the wet ground, tinted glasses reflecting the gloomy light. Stephen exited next, looking tense. The attorney shot Jonathan a warning glare as they approached. "Well, well," Jonathan drawled, glancing from Stephen to Benjamin. "You actually came." Benjamin swallowed, posture rigid. "Let's get this over with," he said, keeping his voice firm. "What do you have?" Jonathan smirked. "Plenty. Photos, documents, references to your hidden identity, enough to let the press have a field day with your saintly persona, or to tip off certain investors who'd love to buy out your family's holdings at a discount if your reputation plummets." Stephen raised a hand. "So you want money to keep quiet?" "Money, yes," Jonathan said with a casual shrug. "But I also want a piece of the empire. I've been overshadowed long enough. You owe me for deals that never went my way. I figure a nice chunk of your assets will be enough to satisfy me, and Rachel, if she plays ball." Benjamin's jaw clenched. "You're dreaming if you think I'll just sign over my fortune because of your threats." Jonathan's eyes glinted. "I think you will, to avoid exposure. Don't forget, I know about your caretaker charade. The public would eat that up. Poor little rich boy faking blindness, humiliating those around him. It'd be a scandal no PR team could fix." Stephen stepped in. "We could sue you for blackmail." Jonathan barked a laugh. "Go ahead. Then I'll leak everything and you'll spend months in court while your reputation drowns in media slime." He opened his coat, retrieving a slim folder from an inside pocket. "Sign a preliminary agreement that you'll transfer me a controlling stake in certain holdings, and we keep it all hush-hush. You can go back to playing blind with your caretaker or whatever else you do." Benjamin's hands tightened on the cane. Anger and shame warred in his chest. "I'm done lying," he muttered. "No more, and I won't be blackmailed." Jonathan's smirk faded. "Then you leave me no choice." He pulled out a phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "A single tap sends my file to 6 reporters. 10 minutes later, you're the headline." Stephen tensed, shooting Benjamin a look that begged for calm. "Jonathan," he said carefully, "maybe we can negotiate a lesser share or a financial settlement, something that doesn't compromise the entire empire." Jonathan's lip curled. "Nice try, counselor, but I've come too far for scraps. This is my moment." Meanwhile, at the house, Clara paced anxiously, bracing for Rachel's arrival. The clock read 12:10. She'd tried Stephen again, still no response. Outside, the rain battered the windows. Then, as expected, she heard the crunch of tires on wet gravel. A car door slammed. She rushed to the foyer just as the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. Gritting her teeth, Clara opened it a crack, peering out. Rachel stood there in a sleek black raincoat, hair damp but her expression sharp as a knife. "Move!" Rachel snapped, pushing the door open. "I'm seeing Ben Davis, now." Clara braced herself, blocking the entrance. "He's not here," she said firmly, mind racing for a believable excuse. He had a medical appointment." Rachel's dark eyes narrowed. "Sure he did. Funny that he always vanishes when I show up. It's almost like he's avoiding me." "I told you, he's in no state for visitors," Clara repeated. She tried to recall all the caretaker's lines from before. "Between his condition and the stress you're causing, it's not good for him." Rachel snorted. "Condition, yeah. I've heard rumors that dear Mr. Davis might not be so helpless after all." She glanced past Clara, scanning the hallway. "Let me see for myself." Clara's heart pounded. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you in. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Rachel arched an eyebrow. "Go ahead, but I bet the police would be interested in a caretaker covering up a wealthy man's false disability. That's fraud, honey, if he's receiving any government benefits or private insurance. Want to test it?" Clara's gut twisted. She had no idea if any insurance fraud was technically in play, but she wasn't going to cave. "He's not receiving benefits," she said, voice shaking. "We're not doing anything illegal." Rachel gave a mocking smile. "Well, we'll see about that. Now step aside, or do you want me to push past you?" For an instant, Clara considered letting her in, but that would blow the entire ruse if Rachel found the house empty. Summoning her courage, Clara squared her shoulders. "I can't let you pass." Rachel smirked, stepping forward menacingly. Just then, a flash of headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Another car was pulling up. Rachel snapped her gaze over her shoulder, eyes narrowing. The new arrival was an unmarked sedan, and two men in suits emerged, swiftly approaching. One flashed a badge. "Ma'am, I'm with the private security company retained by Mr. Davis. We have reason to believe you're trespassing." Rachel's eyes blazed. "Private security? Are you kidding me?" One of the men gently but firmly placed a hand on her arm. "We'll have to ask you to leave the property or we'll call the authorities." The other took a step between Rachel and Clara, blocking any further attempt at entry. Rachel glared, fury evident. "This isn't over," she spat. "Tell your so-called boss he can't hide forever." Then, with a final glare at Clara, she turned on her heel and marched to her car, slamming the door. The vehicle peeled away, tires skidding in the rain. Clara stood in the foyer, adrenaline coursing through her veins. One of the security men turned to her with a brief nod. "We apologize for the intrusion, miss. Mr. Monroe arranged for us to watch the premises. Are you all right?" She exhaled shakily. I think so. Thank you." The men left quietly, returning to their car. Clara closed the door, heart thudding. Whatever was happening at the warehouse, at least she'd held Rachel off. Barely. Back at the warehouse, Jonathan pressed the phone screen with a smug grin. "Time's up," he said. But before the call could go through, a shout echoed from across the large space. "Freeze!" A pair of men appeared at the far entrance, wearing plain clothes but clearly armed. They flashed identification. "Private security!" one barked. "Put the phone down!" Jonathan whirled, phone clutched in his fist. "What the—" he spat, eyes darting from Stephen to Benjamin. "You brought muscle after all?" Stephen lifted his hands, feigning surprise. "I just wanted to ensure my client's safety," he said. "They're not here to hurt you, but if you keep threatening blackmail—" Jonathan's face twisted with rage. "This is a trap," he hissed. "Fine, you want a scene? Then let's do it." He turned to Benjamin. "If I can't blackmail you quietly, I'll blow you up publicly right now." He tapped furiously on the phone's screen, presumably sending the incriminating files. Benjamin's heart lurched. "Stop!" he cried, lunging forward, actually forgetting to fake the blindness for an instant. Stephen grabbed his arm to restrain him, guiding him back into the ruse. But the slip was subtle enough that Jonathan might not notice. With a triumphant grin, Jonathan pocketed the device. Too late. My contact has everything. Better brace for the headlines, Lancaster. He spat the last word like a curse. The private security men edged closer. Sir, put your hands up. We need to check that phone, one ordered. Jonathan scoffed. No chance, I'm leaving. He darted sideways, weaving past crates. The men rushed after him. For a chaotic few seconds, the warehouse echoed with footsteps and yells. Then a sharp scuffle, the sound of something metallic hitting the floor, a pained grunt. And finally, Jonathan was restrained against the wall, phone falling from his pocket onto the concrete. Stephen hurried forward, retrieving the phone. The security men pinned Jonathan's arms. Looks like your message might not have gone through, Stephen observed, scrolling the phone's screen. No service in this old building. The email's stuck in the outbox. He promptly pressed delete. Jonathan cursed, struggling. Let go of me, you... Benjamin exhaled shakily, stepping forward with cautious steps. He kept up the mild act of not seeing, though his heart hammered. Jonathan, he said, voice tight. You lose. The blackmailer glared, chest heaving. You think you've won? Rachel's still out there. She has her own angle. You can't stop both of us forever. Stephen signaled to the security men. We'll turn him over to law enforcement. We have enough evidence to show attempted blackmail. Jonathan's furious protests echoed as they hauled him away. Soon the warehouse fell silent again, save for the dripping water and Benjamin's ragged breaths. Stephen placed a hand on Benjamin's shoulder. You okay? Benjamin let out a shaky nod, tinted glasses somehow still perched on his nose. Yes, it's over, he whispered, except for Rachel. Clara will hold her off, Stephen said quietly. Come on, let's get out of here. We'll coordinate with the PI to keep an eye on Rachel next. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when they pulled into the driveway back at the house. The rain had died to a gentle drizzle, and Clara stood by the front door, anxiously awaiting their return. Her eyes flicked over the sedan, taking in Benjamin's relieved but exhausted posture, Stephen's grim nod. She stepped out, umbrella in hand, meeting them halfway. Are you all right? What happened? Benjamin exhaled. Jonathan's in custody. He tried sending evidence but couldn't get a signal. We stopped him. For now, it's contained. Clara's shoulders sagged in relief. Rachel came. Your security guys turned her away. Stephen gave a brisk nod. That's good. We'll monitor her next. But if Jonathan is behind bars, her leverage might be weaker now. They headed inside, tension gradually lifting. Once the door closed, Stephen turned to Benjamin. I'll handle the legal side from here. If Rachel tries anything, we'll do the same. This fiasco might be nearly over. Benjamin rubbed his face, glasses pushing up slightly, revealing clear, weary eyes to Clara for the first time since the confrontation began. Thank you, he told Stephen. Truly. Stephen nodded. Then, with a pointed glance at Clara, he said, I'll give you two some space. There's a lot to talk about. He gathered his briefcase and retreated to the study. In the quiet foyer, Clara faced Benjamin. His tinted glasses hung awkwardly at his chest now, no longer concealing anything. She got her first real look at the eyes he'd hidden all this time. They were warm brown, flecked with subtle gold. They held regret and relief and something like yearning. He swallowed. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough. For everything. Lying about the blindness, dragging you into danger, making you doubt what was real. Clara's eyes brimmed with emotions she could barely untangle. Benjamin, why? She asked, voice shaking. Why go to such extremes? He shut his eyes briefly, then opened them, meeting her gaze squarely, no longer pretending. Because I'd never known real kindness that wasn't tainted by my name or fortune. I thought if I disappeared and pretended to be blind, I could see who truly cared. It was selfish, manipulative, and I regret it more than I can say. She folded her arms, blinking away tears. Do you realize how humiliating it is for me to learn my entire role here was staged? He flinched, reaching out tentatively before letting his arm drop. I know. And I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I do care about you, Clara. Not because you took care of me or made me feel safe, but because beneath it all, you're genuine, compassionate, everything I was missing. Her chest tightened. She wanted to hold on to anger. It felt safer than grappling with the complicated swirl of feelings. But his raw confession, the sincerity in his no longer shielded eyes, made it difficult. "And what about me?" she whispered. "I've been caring for a patient who didn't exist. I uprooted my life, thinking I was needed, and you never needed me in that way." He shook his head fiercely. "I did need you. Maybe not for physical blindness, but for a deeper loneliness. You've been the only real thing in my life for so long." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. "That's not fair. You put me in a position where I couldn't consent to this arrangement properly." His voice trembled with regret. "You're right. I stole your agency by deceiving you. I can only beg your understanding that my own fear drove me to it, and if you need to leave now, I won't stop you. I don't want to trap you in any more lies." She inhaled unsteadily, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me the truth sooner." His gaze dropped, shame washing over him. "I know. I wish I had." For a long moment the house was silent except for the steady drip of rain from the eaves. Clara wiped her cheeks, struggling to steady her voice. "The sad thing is, I do believe you cared for me. You can't fake every moment of kindness and closeness we shared. But the betrayal is still so deep." He stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her arm, this time without feigning blindness. "If you'll let me, I want to earn your forgiveness. I'll come clean publicly or I'll vanish if that's what you want. I'll do anything to make this right." She looked up at him, raw hurt mingling with the soft flicker of the compassion she couldn't banish. "I don't have an easy answer," she admitted. "I need time to process this. Maybe we can start by telling the truth from now on. No more secrets, no more Mr. Davis." His eyes shone with relief and remorse. "Agreed. From now on, I'm just Benjamin, whoever that is, minus the facade." She gave a shaky nod. "All right." Then, voice quavering, she added, "And I'm Clara, the caretaker who's no longer sure what her role is, but maybe we can figure it out. Together?" A fragile hope lit his face. "I'd like that," he whispered. She let him gently clasp her hands, tears still sliding down her cheeks. They stood there, on the threshold of a new uncertainty, one forged by heartbreak and deception, but just possibly lit by the spark of something genuine. The illusions were gone, and only raw vulnerability remained. Behind them, the old grandfather clock chimed, marking the hour. Stephen would finalize legal steps to keep Rachel at bay. Jonathan was in custody, and the immediate threat of public scandal had receded. For now. Yet the deeper fallout of Benjamin's lie was only beginning to unfold. Clara squeezed his hands, then drew away, turning her face aside. "We'll take it one day at a time," she said, voice steadier now. "I can't promise forgiveness overnight, but maybe if you show me who you really are and it's someone worth trusting, there's a chance." Benjamin nodded, chest tight with emotion. "Thank you," he repeated softly, knowing it wasn't enough but clinging to that slim possibility. One day at a time. As the rain eased to a gentle patter, they stood in the quiet house, no longer caretaker and blind patient, but two people navigating the fragile beginnings of truth. It wouldn't be an easy road, but for the first time there were no tinted glasses between them, no illusions, no staged vulnerability. Only the promise of honesty and whatever small measure of hope they could rebuild together. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.